Hello, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever moment of this beautiful middle of the week you're enjoying on your time zones. It is such a joy to welcome you for our day 3 of the 3rd edition of our virtual summit, Becoming a Strategic HR Business Partner. My name is Minola Jacques. I am your co-host for the next 3 hours. And we have Barbara taking care of us. She's working her technology and logistics magic backstage. So please also do say thank you if you enjoy these conversations to Barbara. And we will be spending the next hour discussing about the people analytics journey for HR BPs. We do have an amazing lineup of speakers, and don't take my word for it. So Barbara, please help me bring them on stage. And we will dedicate the next 1 hour or so talking about how can we develop data-focused skills and capabilities as a learning strategy for HR. Oof, quite a mouthful. So otherwise, no pressure. Now, please do drop us in the comments. At least let us know where you're watching or listening right now. It's always such a joy to see where Hacking HR takes us around the world. But also, first and foremost, it lets us know that technology is actually working. And also, a very, very warm encouragement to you all to consider this conversation open for you as well, just as much as it is for our panelists. So do let us know your thoughts, your opinions, share your people analytics stories in the chat. And also what we find very, very useful, and the entire community is very grateful when this happens, if you have some resources that have been particularly helpful to you on your people analytics journey, books, articles, other conversations outside of Hacking HR, that's also wonderful. Just drop them in the comments and help us grow together. So we do aim to wrap this up just a little bit shy of 1 full hour, just making sure that whoever rolls throughout the panels, we do have a couple of minutes just to stretch and restock on water, coffee, ice cream, whatever helps us stay focused. And let's start this off easy. A short round of introductions, and the drill is simple. What I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen clockwise. And first, just shortly introduce yourselves. And then if you can let us know what made people analytics a topic near and dear to your heart. Do you have a story? Do you have an experience? Do you have a mentor? So what made people analytics a friendly subject for you? So Christy, it's so great to see you. Welcome.
Awesome, Minola, thank you. Love to be a part of such a great panel and talk about some nerdy stuff a little bit, right? I mean, you're talking about analytics, right? Also seeing the comments of everybody come in from all corners of the world. So glad to be a part of this conversation. So I'm Christy Politic. I have about 20 years experience in the construction industry, most of which is in that business partner space. The last 3 years, I've been working as a consultant on my own, working with construction leaders to help them improve their employee experience. Based out of the Portland, Oregon area, so we're just thinking about fall. Rainy one day, sunny the next. So Minola, for me, when it comes to people analytics, what really brings me to it is that data and analytics can tell a story. We can all stand up and as business partners around and HR leaders, we tell stories all the time. And I found the power, if you bring analytics and data to that conversation, just the impact that you can have to influence the things that you want to get done and kind of help that journey along a little bit faster and a little bit further. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. Evelyn, it's been what, half an hour? We just shared the panel for the October series. Good to see you.
You as well. Hello, everyone. I'm Evelyn Reed. I have about 15 years of HR experience, from tactical to strategic. I'm currently sitting as the head of HR for a merchandising company, as well as my moniker HR John, which is my social media platform, and where I help small businesses as well as employees advocate for themselves. And so for me, analytics is near and dear, because I'm like Christy, it brings out the geek in me. I'm technical. So a lot of things that would probably go against just, the human people side of it resonates with me. And so it helps me to create the picture that I need to sway my leaders and my operators to meet me, halfway in the bridge way, right? Because ultimately, I think we all want the same thing. Sometimes we just go about getting there different ways. So data helps us build a path together and an alignment with where we want to go. So that's why it's near and dear for me.
Wonderful. Shay, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. Shay Green, I am the Senior VP of HR for Grace Hill. Happy to see all of the folks joining us live, and extremely happy to be on this talking about this particular topic with this group of panelists. And for me, I echo exactly what Christy and Evelyn have shared. I love the metric side of the house, but primarily it convinces not only myself, but it convinces the organization of the initiatives that HR is bringing forward. So the only way that you can really confidently speak about what you're talking about is through metrics and data. So that's why I'm happy to be here and happy to share my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, what a joy to have you with us, Charmaine. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Thank you. So I'm Charmaine, founder and CEO of Chapter 2 LLC, which is an organizational development consultancy. And this question is really interesting, and I love it because this is what my company was based on, using data-backed people insights to help advance strategy processes. So it's personal, right, for my business. And for a couple decades in HR, just really realizing it really has to be about what is the data telling us, because that's what enables us to be able to make the decisions, and what enables us to have the actionable insights that are going to help us perform a lot better. And emotions vary, but data does not.
It almost feels like we started the intro with mic drop moments, because all of you really dropped some signature expressions there. Now, before we go very, very deep into the topic of the panel, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on, if we look at this through the lens of data and people analytics, what and used how, what separates a good HRBP from a great HRBP? What makes that difference, and what puts the strategic spin to an HRBP through the lens of people analytics? And what I will do, I will just leave that question on the e-table of our conversation, and let's do a dry run for the unmuting competition. Let's see where inspiration strikes.
Evelyn. Go ahead, jump in. Oh, Evelyn, you beat me to it. You go.
I wanted to be dead silent. I think for me, one of the things I look for is, I think what makes a great HRBP is someone who can not only gather the data, but can analyze the data and be able to articulate what the data means, and then be able to put plans and actions behind that data. I think a good HRBP knows where to get the data, or sometimes how to collect the data, but a great HRBP knows how to take that data, make plans, and get reinforcements through partnerships and allyships of other departments to make this better for the business and organization.
Christy.
Evelyn, you darn near took the words right out of my mouth, right? It's that analyzation piece. And so, I mean, leave that space, amplify your voice. I think the one thing I'd also add that, takes a good HRBP to a great HRBP is the ability to communicate and share that data in a palatable way, right? We can all print off a Google database report, right? Ain't nobody's going to be paying attention to that, right? So a great HRBP can take that data and not just analyze, but also present it in a way that's easily digestible for their leaders to be able to synthesize some of that as well. So yeah.
If I could just add one little piece to that, I mean, spot on, Christy and Evelyn. And I want to say that becoming a great HRBP takes time. That doesn't happen overnight. And another piece to that is ensuring that you're always connected to your leaders, so that they can help you formulate what the metrics or the analytics that you need to utilize for them. Because in essence, it's a BP, business partner. And in order for you to partner, effectively, you have to partner with the business and the business leaders.
Absolutely. I would agree with everything that everyone said, and also add the storytelling piece, because there are a lot of people that I think are really great at data fluency, but the ability to then translate that, as Shay just brought up, for the business, what does that mean? But tell it in a way that resonates with the business, right? I think great for me, HR business partner, is someone who understands the business well enough to know how to adapt that storytelling and that communication in a way that resonates with that particular business leader. It's not just about, oh, here's the big strategic plan for the entire organization. Can you tell that story in a way that everyone can connect to it and sees the bigger picture? Can you paint the picture and the vision for them? And then finally, I also think it's important to understand what that change management piece looks like, right? And is that person also able in their communications to develop a plan that is grounded in change management to help people move through whatever that may mean? And I think that for me is what means great. It's the data fluency, yes, the ability to connect back to the business, the ability then to tell a story in a way that really resonates and connects with people, and the ability to help usher the organization through change as a result of all of those pieces.
Wow, what an amazing conversation this will be. So I already have a mental post-it with storytelling, and I promise we will come back and discuss more about this. So I look at the very long panel title we have, the People Analytics Journey for HRBPs. So I am curious, what kind of data and analytics are there on this journey? And I do have a spin to my question. In addition to HR data and HR analytics, what kind of business data and business analytics do HRBPs need to be familiar with or look for in order to do their work in the most meaningful way? And Shay, I would invite you to lead us into this.
Thank you, Manila. There are hundreds of metrics that you can track in HR. We have developed a metric for just about every aspect of HR that we do, right? When I'm thinking about what's going to work best in an organization, I look at it from the entire employee experience. So from onboarding to being a part of the organization, and then even the offboarding activities and metrics that are associated with an employee, because all of those data pieces. So when I'm talking about onboarding, I'm saying surveying employees at the start of their roles with an organization, so you can get a data point and a benchmark to see if there are things that you can work differently throughout that process for newer hires. And then employee surveys, we all know about employee surveys and touch points and EPS scores, things of that sort. And then of course, exit interviews, where applicable, are all really good core data points that I like to look at and have in every aspect of my career. Now, when you're talking about understanding the business a bit more, I would say the first piece you want to tackle and understand and get connected with is the finance area. Understanding the balance sheet, understanding how the company makes money, how the company loses money, and how the people aspect actually impacts all of that. Because in every organization, every piece of operation that happens in an organization, there is a people implication to it, and you can tie it to that. So I'll just stop there because I'm sure there are some other key nuggets to be shared, but that's where I look to from a people analytics, but also a business analytics as well.
Thank you. Well, you all saw that Going Glass is sitting in the hot seat. So please, I can see your unmuting skills improving by the second. Evelyn.
I couldn't agree more with Shay with understanding the finance side. And I think to follow that, I would say once you understand the business and the financial pieces, understanding the compliance pieces as well, so that you're not only making money, but you're doing it compliantly and that there's no issues or hiccup that's going to cost money. So I would think metrics in that regard. And then I would also add demographics. Because those help not just, understanding who you have, but also how to make impactful decisions. Because you don't want to be making decisions. Case in point, you don't want to put, no, this isn't a correct one, but a lactation room in a facility that has all males, right? That makes zero sense. That's a waste of space. That space could be used for something, more useful, more impactful for that group of individuals. And again, probably not the best, but just something quick I could think off the top of my head. And so I think, understanding those metrics, I know there's plenty of more that I'm pretty sure Charmaine and Christy will go into, but I think following the financial pieces, those would be critical ones.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think also the market and industry trends, I think a lot of times within HR, at least within my experience, we're so focused on our own data. We're not looking at what is the data that relates to how the business operates, not just financially, but, in other areas too, right? Are there industry trends coming or going? Are there things that actually impact the way the business is not only being perceived, but whether or not it's going to be able to make money? And I think that for me, going back to the first question, it really helps separate the great. I know one of the things that I always did, when I was coming up was going, even if it was annoying, I look back now like, wow, you probably were very annoying to some of these people, would be go to different business leads and say, hey, can I shadow your team for the day? Can I understand how this works? Can you show me how the system works? And what I found was that there were they were excited that just someone was interested in what they were interested into, because they were not used to that from HR. So for the HR people on the call, I would say, show your business that you're interested, right? Not just at performance reviews or salary, but that you're genuinely interested in how the engine works, right? Because you'll get a lot more out of that, and it will help you with better decision making. With the integration and the ability, to the question, Manola, it's going to help you gain integrated in the people analytics side with the business analytics and data side. It's going to help you have a much broader perspective on how to achieve the business objectives with people. And people, no matter what organization it is, are the most expensive resources at every company. So when we think about why this is important, it's because most of your spend is on your people. So if you can do that in a way that aligns your business objectives with your people objectives, leveraging data and analyzing the pieces that you need, that's really going to help propel forward. Like you said, Shay, when we started, HR has, for me personally, too many analytics. I think we measure way too many things and we get, analysis paralysis. So I also think part of it in terms of great HR is understanding what metrics matter for the organization you're in and why, and then being able to communicate to the people around you why those are your priority areas and what it means for the business.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if there's a train in the background here, and y'all.
Well, I think it's our first standing ovation for what we just shared so far.
Perfect.
We're on the right track.
Perfect. Absolutely. Manola, nicely done. I love it. The other thing that I think about, I mean, to echo and maybe take Charmaine, what you were saying, just like one step further, I've spent most of my career within the construction industry. In addition to understanding the finances, Shay, that you talked about, Evelyn, some of the demographics and some of the compliance pieces, there's some very specific drivers in the construction industry around safety, around backlog. I do not know what those drivers are in healthcare or in manufacturing or in tech. I know they exist. I am not the HR business partner in those spaces. So, to help kind of sift through what some of those drivers are and what HR metrics to align to what business metrics, Charmaine, taking what you said, understand the business you're in. What are those drivers beyond just making money, but how do you make money? What are those other components do you need? And then marry, kind of the HR analytics, right? We've got all of them there. How do we narrow down to the focus one, tie those into your business drivers and make those connections for those operational leaders? And that, going back to, a question earlier, that takes a good HR business partner and helps develop them into a great HR business partner.
Manila, if I could just share, because I threw out an acronym and I'm not sure if everyone knows what that means. So I said EPS, and that's Employee Promoter Score. That is a question around, would you invite someone to work for your company? And that shares with us how satisfied and engaged you are with an organization. But I wanted to clear that up too.
Thank you so very much. And this is the perfect segue to the next question, because I was about to ask, what are the fundamental data-driven skills and competencies? And last week we had the Hacking HR People Analytics Summit. And I asked the speakers in a panel, what were the things that they learned in their people analytics journey? And also, what is the most important thing that they had to unlearn in order for them to perform better? And one of the things that they mentioned was, to not get married to the acronyms. So thank you so very much, Shay. You made my life as a facilitator so much easier. So data-focused skills and capabilities for strategic HRBPs. And you will get extra points if you can name a skill that is not amongst the usual suspects. So something that's an outlier. And if we can park storytelling, because we do have a specific slice of the conversation reserved for storytelling. Christy, would you lead us into this?
Yeah, there's so many skills. It's kind of tough to know where to say. I will say the thing, and it's a fairly tactical skill, but one of the things that I've found to be really beneficial is learning Power BI. So for those that are unfamiliar with it, it is a technical platform where you can pull in different sources of data, and then it can help do some of that analysis for you. And so, yes, there's, how do you synthesize the data? How do you analyze it? But getting some competencies around some of the tools to help you do this is going to make your life easy. Power BI being the one that comes to mind most immediately. There's other different platforms and tools, but how do you utilize the tools that you have, right? Whatever you have in your organization to help you analyze the data, I think is something that I would bring to the surface.
Charmaine.
So many different things. I think the data modeling stands out for me too. And I think something that I also think empathy has to be involved in there. I just want to bring that in because all data isn't good data, right? And if you're not able to look at the data at the organization to understand what is the historical context and the structural context for this organization that may have led to this, right? Because all our outputs are going to be based on what went in. I also think that's something that's important, and being able to look at that through that empathetic lens and understanding of how might we have gotten here, I think that's also something that I would add. Yes, I could think about machine learning and all those things, but that one is what stands out the most to me as a possibility.
Evelyn, I see you unmuted.
I would echo the empathy one because I think that goes unnoticed when thinking about data. So I would definitely echo that one. I think the other one is critical thinking and problem solving. It sounds like something that you should know, but sometimes it's not always hand in hand with data. I think that's real critical just because data gives you the metrics and things you need to kind of lay the foundation for getting through problems, but you really have to have critical thinking and problem solving skills to kind of get to the finish line of things. So I think it goes hand in hand.
Hmm.
I mean, everyone on the panel has said everything that I was thinking. I think you looked inside my brains, ladies. But I would echo exactly what these ladies are saying. Critical skills is very, very important. I'm going to talk about a little bit of something different because I think analytics and being an analyst is just a given. But I also think having patience with yourself, but also getting a mentor in this particular area if you're new to it. So the ability to seek guidance is a critical skill that you'll want to have so that you aren't on this journey alone. And then one that, we don't think about, but Charmaine touched on it, is empathy, especially given after the pandemic. We are in a new way of working, as we all know. And being relatable in HR is a skill set that I think all of us need because folks are looking for us to be able to help them through the day-to-day things, but also being very analytical and helping us predict how to best, help the organization grow and move forward.
What an amazing portfolio of skills. And I was listening to your answers and I was thinking, we do have this dream of HRBPs with, superpowers across all skills and capabilities. I also want to be mindful of quite possibly many people in our audience today or later in the recording that they might be in a reality of an HR function of one. So my question is, if that is your reality, how can we maybe prioritize is not the best word, but how can you focus your development within the people analytics domain so that you can do the best that you can while still being an HR function of one?
If I can take that, I think this is near and dear to a lot of us where we started, right? And we are tasked endlessly with things to do. But I also want to say prioritizing is the right word because you are responsible for your growth. And where I would say that one can start is just picking one metric to get really good at over a period of time and then adding along to that, because you don't want to inundate yourself with metrics that you don't know are relative or relevant to the organization. But as a growth opportunity for yourselves, pick one that's important to you, and then vet it through the organization, and then start communicating that and measuring that over time.
Yeah, Shay, just to amplify that a little bit, is I think that's spot on, right? Like you mentioned earlier, there's so many metrics out there that you can track in terms of HR that may or may not make sense for your organization. And for those HR departments of one out there, again, you don't have time to go through and pull all of that, right? But what are some of those fundamental core metrics, headcount, turnover, some of those, again, what are those core, what are those key drivers for your business? How do you make those connections there? Again, start, establishing one or two connections, strengthen those, make sure they're the right ones. If they're not, chuck them, right? focus your time and effort where you want. And even if you just try a metric or two and it doesn't seem to make sense, not resonating, not driving the right behaviors that you want to drive, okay, shift your focus, right? Choose a different metric or two that makes sense for your business and where you're at right now.
Yeah, I definitely think it starts with metrics. I also think that and I'm not speaking for everyone, I'm just speaking about what I've experienced, right? I've experienced HR people who have this, I have to carry this whole weight on my shoulders mentality. And the reality is it's about the metrics and the right metrics, but that starts with a conversation to the business to say, here's what I'm able to do. What is it that you're looking for? How can I help? Here's what I will be able to do. In order to do X, I need some support. And that doesn't have to be another HR person, but is there an aspect of something that is being done that can be taken off your plate that someone else in the business can take on, right? I know sometimes we think, oh, I have to be the person, but there are times where I have found the person who was managing the front desk as super helpful with getting some things off of my team's plate, right? Even operating with a small team, right? Fortunately, I've never been of one, except when I've done like pro bono stuff to help people, but that's also been in help too. And delegating within the business, like, hey, leader, I need you to own this piece. And owning this piece means I need this information by this date. If not, then this is not what we're going to be able to do. I think it also has to be about not just understanding what metrics the organization wants to matter and being able to support why that matters for your particular organization, but figuring out what are the pieces that you can delegate so that you actually have time to invest in your own development, right? Because it's like an offshoot. Get that skill going, and then it might be like a domino effect. Something else just like, oh, well, this is an easy add-on, right? So I definitely think delegation has to be a big part of that. And some of that messaging in our heads about we cannot do this, we can't go for help, we can't say we can't do this, that also has to stop.
I echo and amplify those sentiments. And I agree with, I think it was Shay who stated, start with one and then kind of build upon it. Because to your point, Charmaine, we can't overwhelm ourselves because then we get nothing done. I would also say to leverage the resources that are available. Someone in the chat mentioned it, which I absolutely love, is Power Automate. That has taken so much off of my plate. Just if you could learn it, Microsoft actually has a lot of trainings on it. So you can do, and I believe they're free if I'm not mistaken, if you have Microsoft already. But it will help you with just, minor things that you're doing manually that you don't realize it, that can be automated and taken so much off of your plate, so that you can focus on other things and then focus on building upon. In addition to what Charmaine said, you're adding a skill to yourself that you're learning. In my organization, like our IT people were like, well, how do you know how to use Power? I taught myself. I learned it. I asked questions. I reached out when I needed support. But for the most part, I invested in learning it so that it could better me and my team.
So we are a couple of minutes already in the second half of our conversation, and I would like to take a few seconds just to welcome everybody who joined us over the past few minutes. And also, no worries, you did miss out on a great conversation, but you can find the recording on hackinghrlab.io or in our LinkedIn space just a little bit after we go off live. But I'm a journalist by trade, so I think enough is enough with how much we paste ourselves with storytelling, and it's time that we go into addressing storytelling with data. And I will just share with our audience that we got an ask while we were backstage just getting ready to go live to have a little bit of fun, and I'm like, challenge accepted. I do believe that humor is serious business and we don't use it enough in our workplaces. I would very warmly recommend 2 resources to everybody watching us. One is an amazing book called Humor Seriously. And the other one is called So Do You Talk Funny? And it's a book inspired by stand-up comedy, and it gives you amazing tips for business presentations. Now, How do we talk about data and analytics? We said palatable. I see you're palatable, and I will raise you my funny. And I will share a tip. I oftentimes use cartoons. I think that helps us drive the point. So last month we had the Pulse survey results coming in, and in two different presentations, I used two different covers. They're memes from Game of Thrones. So one was, "You know nothing, Jon Snow, here's the data." And the other one was, "Brace yourselves, the results are coming." Earlier this week, we were looking at some change readiness assessment analytics. And I had a slide with Morgan Freeman saying that these numbers would be so much more inspiring if I narrated over the Excel spreadsheet. So what do you do to make your analytics presentations inspiring and fun and relatable?
I think your suggestions were spot on. I think it's also knowing your audience, and knowing what resonates with them, right? So some may not be cartoon driven. That's fine. Like, I personally like them, but some may not, right? So if they aren't, maybe they're more picturesque, right? So maybe it's getting clip arts from, like our organization has standard marketing clip arts. So it kind of helps emphasize things. Like, so when we have an idea, we have like a shiny light bulb that's standardized to our company organization, for our standard things. When we do internally, we're a little bit more lax, where we're doing the memes or the characters, and again, tying it to what we call our culture pillars, and our data, so that everything kind of is cohesive and flowing correctly, and resonating with that audience.
Yeah, one more recommendation that I would add is, it came out a while ago, but a book by Dan and Chip Heath called Switch. So it has such a great concept around change management, Charmaine, that you talked about you doing, and how do you take that. But it's the piece, there's the data piece, but there's also, how do you hit that emotional trigger for a person, right? How do you get at their gut, whether they're laughing, whether they get angry, some sort of give a darn, right? And that's, Evelyn, knowing your audience, what resonates with them. But if you can hit that give a darn button in there in whatever way makes sense for the data that you're presenting, hit them personally, present them with the data. And then the book talks about, okay, then what is the next path forward, right? It's really laying that foundation of change for Charmaine that you talked about, of, getting those components together can really help drive that change, but getting at that emotional trigger in there somewhere.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's so key, because hopefully we're all, hopefully all the people we're interacting with at work are human, hopefully, but I really think it's important, to tell stories in a way, even if it's about the organization or culture, not to be afraid of adding something that hasn't been there before, right? I've definitely worked in very, very corporate places and not been afraid to throw an image randomly of a dog or something that people can relate to, right? Just to get people, like, what's going on? What are we talking? Or starting the story off with, I remember one organization, one of the people on my team had a dog we were all obsessed with. And I have allergies, but just the stories about the diva-ness of this dog would always crack us up. So even starting off like that, to say, wait a minute, got to give you a Bailey story, and then going from there. But I think we also have to give people more credit and grace to say, even if I am in an organization that has traditionally been, air quotes, stiff, I can still infuse something, right? Like you can still tell that story. And I found there are a couple of things that really get people's attentions. If there's something about a kid, if there's something about an animal, right? People will pay attention. So that's the thing that you can lean on. Try it. I personally, I've started a presentation with, because I do like cartoons, Acme, Manola. Every time I learn about you more, I'm like, yes, this is why the universe brought us together. But like the Acme black hole, when you used to fall into that and go into a different world, I've started a presentation with that to say, ever feel like you just want to fall right through because of things that are happening? And it gets people's attentions, right? And figuring out where there are different points of the presentation that you can add maybe something that's moving or graphical, something that just is unexpected that breaks up the monotony of what they're experiencing. More importantly, find out from people what they're interested in, right? Because I believe in taking the time to get to know people. If I was presenting to a leadership team, because I know, oh, this person likes Stu from, Family Guy, or that I would find little ways where those little characters might pop up in the presentation because it's unexpected, but I also know that they then knew that was a nod to them. There's different ways.
Adding a bit of humor takes the seriousness out of the conversation, right? And I know this about me, is that I don't take anything too serious because I need to move on, right? I got other stuff to do. But if I'm entering conversations where I don't know the audience, which is sometimes the first pass, I often open up with a question, because then sometimes it's rhetorical, sometimes I'm looking for an answer, because that will help me to formulate the story that I pull from throughout the conversation. And ultimately, my goal is to get, at least one person in that conversation on my side, because it helps me to move the initiatives a bit more better, or, better.
I think it's an inclusive and balancing curiosity, and it comes as a question. So we talked about the skills and the capabilities that HRBPs can develop to be more data-driven. Now, I am curious about what skills and capabilities can HRBPs proactively develop in their business counterparts so that they can make the most out of HR data and people analytics. So how can we look at this data focused for people analytics holistically, not just for the HRBPs, but also for the HRBPs to have the best prepared data focused partners and allies and audience within the business? How do we do that?
I would say that they'd have to understand the business functionalities as well as the business pain points, metrics, and things of that nature. Because with that will help shape what makes your people data more relevant to the business. So case in point, if your financial KPIs are on the low side, then it's kind of, befundling to give an initiative that costs, X amount of money when you financially can't afford it, right? And as opposed to maybe, okay, there's a need, but how do we get it without the financial impact so that we're not, going against our strategy of, bringing our financial impacts up, and vice versa, right? And so I think once the business partner understands the business data and business analytics, then they can shape and have better people data and people analytics.
I think for me, Manola, when you ask that question, the skill, that comes up is around trust, because people can have the title of HR business partner, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a trusted partner. And so I would focus on building that trust with your business partners, right? Your partners in the business. Because then when you bring data to them, you already have that trusted foundation where they're not going to start shooting holes in what you're bringing. They'll trust you, they'll trust the data, they'll trust where it comes from, which is sometimes the first really big hurdle to get over, to then start talking about, okay, now what do we do with it? So I would say that trust piece is something that if it's lacking, if it's weak, I would continue to build that in other ways, right? So that again, when you bring the data, they're like, yes, okay, this is what you're showing me. Okay, great. Now what do we do about it? Perfect, right? You've got that partnership going forward.
Mic drop to Christy and Evelyn, but mic drop, to Christy on the trust aspect, because that's the foundation of the skill set needed to be a great HR BP. And when we talk about trust, what does that look like? And that is building a proactive relationship, as Christy said, with your partners in the business. So it's not this reactive approach of, oh, I'm just going to, pick a time to go and talk to a leader. It's being methodical and thoughtful before you take the information to that partner or to that leader, so that they can understand where you're coming from, and also, lock arms with you on this journey of building that skill set. So it has to be thoughtful. It has to be, methodical, but that's the piece of building trust in this whole microcosm of being a great HRBP.
Yeah. And I would add, it's important to start with the why sometimes. Well, for me, all the time. But sometimes we focus so much on the what, and really we should focus more on the why, and then translate that why into like what that's going to mean, right? And how that's going to come to life. And I think a skill too is, HR understanding not just about the business, but the language of the business, right? I know sometimes it can be frustrating. I've done this for a while, but I do think as, when you talk about good to great HR business partners, the person who's going to say, you know what, I know this is a new language, but I'm going to have to be the one in this relationship that has to learn the new language, and maybe they'll pick up a couple words and be able to order themselves a meal, but I have to take more of an effort to do that. And I think that's important too, because if you understand the way that the business understands, the way that they present, you can tailor the way that you structure your presentations to match that. That's another thing that I, did throughout my career. Okay, I know this is how the finance team presents something. I know this is what the CEO, because I've sat through enough of their presentations. Let me present it in that way, in their formula, because now their brain, all of our brains, right? So my identical twin sister, her background is mental health, wellness, understands human behavior development. And she always tells me our brains wire for order. We automatically want to put something in a structure. So as HR people, if we can develop the skill of putting it in the structure that they're already used to, it's a lot easier to understand. It's not having to learn even if it is a new language, if the framework of the language that we put in place for them is similar to the framework of the language they already know, it will be a lot easier, right? Why are we doing this? And part of that is understanding what matters to that business person or leader, so that you can then answer that what for them, understanding their why. Then we have to learn more of the language, we do, and present it in a format that they're familiar with, because leverage the brain. I wish more times we would think about how do we leverage the way that the human brain actually works to our advantage versus fighting against it.
Well, it's very painful to say, but we're about 10 minutes from saying goodbye, and I feel like we could have easily spent another 5 hours chatting on this. We just got started, but I do see that we mentioned learning strategy for HR in the title, and I was wondering, how can people in the audience take all this energy and all this inspiration and put it into practice? But I also want to give them some safety. So what are the key pitfalls that you have witnessed? Or what are the biggest misassumptions or miscontracted expectations from a data-focused learning strategy for HR?
I can start. I would say over-reliance on data sometimes, right? Sometimes that could be a pitfall, being so caught up in analysis paralysis that we're not able to separate out to say, wait a minute, what's actually needed in this moment, and understanding whether or not our data is accurate. Is it clean, right? Because data doesn't lie, but it doesn't lie based on what's inputted. Right. So I think that's the other thing that we have to be mindful of. How are we assessing and reassuring people that we are checking to make sure that it is accurate and that we are auditing ourselves? And then sometimes, even if you have all the data, and it could be frustrating, you've done all this beautiful work, you might just be able to really focus on 10% of that to present and, focus on that. So I think the pitfall sometimes is the over reliance on data, and then the desire sometimes to want to shove it all and show it all, and how to embrace this. A really good friend of mine on this panel, who happens to be the host, wrote a book about change management. And one of the things in there it says is just start, right? So choose the piece that you want to start with. You don't even have to tell anyone. Choose the piece that you want to start with. A lot of people have mentioned Power Automate, Power BI. So many things have been mentioned. But even if for you starting is a Google search on what is people analytics about? What is data analytics? How does this play a role in HR? You've started, right? Sometimes start doesn't have to mean that you've signed up for a course. It could be a Google search, or it could be a 30-minute conversation with ChatGPT if you're into that, right? But just start.
I'm going to say a pitfall is knowing all the answers without the right questions, right? Sometimes we think we know the answer. Sometimes we're relying a lot on the analytics. A skill set that I think is going to carry all of us through from start to finish is active listening. Understanding, listening for the key points that's going to help you better tailor the messaging and the initiatives in an organization. But a pitfall is just keep learning, not knowing everything. And as Charmaine said, not, regurgitating or just throwing the spaghetti on the wall.
I would agree with everything you ladies said. I would also add not having effective change management when you're trying to implement a data-driven culture, because you're basically working against the culture when you do that. So having effective change management plan and implementation in place before you embark in that journey is critical, and that requires the buy-in from leadership, as well as their employees underneath them as well. And then another thing I would say is forgetting the human aspect. I think sometimes data is awesome, right? But ultimately, we are still humans, and we still are people. And so being mindful of that with while we're analyzing and presenting data, just keeping in touch with that human element.
Yeah, I think these are all really great pitfalls to be aware of. And I would just add two more to that. Charmaine, you brought up a good point. Assuming your data is clean, right, and accurate. One pitfall I've seen is a judgment of the data of, oh, it should be this. I need to get it to say that. No, data doesn't come with the empathy piece, right? It doesn't come with that, right? It is what it is. So just be careful around that. The other one is, especially for business partners and working with operational leaders, is punting the data over and allowing them to synthesize and analyze it in a silo on their own versus walking through in a partnership. Because I've even seen it happen in meetings as you're trying to walk through the presentation. All of a sudden, someone in the room picks up on one piece and takes it off and runs with it in a direction that doesn't actually make sense if they were to slow down and you were able to kind of help guide them to that. So just be mindful about judging the data and letting some of those operational leaders who we know and love, right, just taking it and run with it, help be that partner and work with them down the path, right, implementing the change management and doing the good things that we need to do.
Mm-hmm. Shay, I saw you unmuting yourself, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to Christy's point of, that one piece of data, that's exactly why I don't give the comment section from an employee engagement survey, because they will pick the one thing and that will guide their entire perspective of the entire survey. So very good point, Christy.
Yeah.
So let's acknowledge and respect and celebrate the fact that October is Wellbeing and Mental Health Month, and I'm under the very joyful and thoughtful influence of a book called Why Hasn't Anyone Told Me This Before? And this is where my wrap-up question comes from. as you are on your own people analytics journey, what is one thing that you had to maybe frustratingly, painfully, time-consumingly had to learn for yourselves, and you just wish, why hasn't anyone told me this before? So consider this the last question, and what we will do, we will go counterclockwise. So Charmaine, you will go first. Just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go. In the meantime, I will just thank so very much our audience for being here. I hope that you will also join us for the next 2 conversations of today. If not, no worries. Like we mentioned before, the recordings will be up and available to all of you on hackinghrlab.io. Charmaine, ready to go?
Yep.
What hasn't anyone told you?
Well, didn't before, because now I know it. That data is neither bad nor good. It's just information, right? It got all these labels assigned to it before, especially within HR, and it really is just information. It's neither bad nor good.
Thank you. Shay.
I echo exactly what she said. It's information, but also that relationships help move the business along with that data. So understanding it, it's information, being able to interpret it, and having those relationships to really help guide the organization and the leaders to the right decisions.
Thank you. Evelyn.
I echo everything that they just said. And I would just also add that, it's information to help build that story that you want to tell, whatever that may be. And so use it appropriately and in that manner.
Wonderful. And Christy.
I think piggybacking a little bit on what Evelyn had said, for me early on, data was just numbers. And it took me a minute, and I think someone had to tell me that it really is a story and a part of a story. And how do you take that data and weave that story in with it to deliver and ultimately drive good change, right? That's what we're doing. But yeah, that piece, like at first you're just like, oh yeah, here's the data on the slide. I'm like, okay, cool. Miss the whole storytelling part, right? Like it's so integral.
Thank you. Well, Christy, Evelyn, Shay, and Charmaine, what a wonderful conversation, like a real treat for mind, heart, and soul equally. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time. There are 2 more conversations today. If we can make it, great. If not, I will see you at many future panels. Thank you so very much for taking the time and the energy and the generosity of sharing. From your own journey. It's really deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who
Thank you,
joined.
everyone. Thank you, everyone in the audience.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
everyone, and welcome back to the second conversation of our third day from our third edition of the virtual summit, Becoming a Strategic HR Business Partner. I hope that many of you stayed with us from the previous conversation. I also hope that many of you jumped for this amazing conversation we will have over the next hour, as we will try to connect the dots between data analytics and people strategy. We will try to talk a little bit about what it is exactly that goes into designing data-informed HR strategy and operations. My name is Minola Jacques. I am your co-host for the next hour. We have Barbara backstage taking care of us, so please do give a lot of technical and logistics credit to her, as you will enjoy the conversation. And we have an amazing lineup of speakers. So Barbara, please do help me bring all those wonderful people on stage. And while they pop up, I will just encourage everybody to consider the chat your conversation space. Do engage with each other. Do drop us your ideas, your thoughts, your experiences, your people analytics stories in the chat. And it's always a great joy to also see where you're listening or watching us from now live. We are always curious to see where Hacking HR takes us around this wonderful globe. So without further ado, I know that people analytics is a very inspiring topic for all of you here. Let's start easy. Let's start with a round of introductions and ease into the topic. So you are all Hacking HR friends and panel veterans. You know the drill. E-mic goes around clockwise as you appear on my screen. And it's easy. First, shortly introduce yourselves and do tell us, what made you fall in love with people analytics? Was it a mentor, a situation, something? What was it? Heather, so good to see you.
Hi, Heather McBride with Shift Moving, Head of People. And what made me love analytics was really around how it helps to make things more applicable to the business. It helps us not just have fluffy stuff, but also be able to have data that backs that up. And I think when I was doing my Six Sigma certification and I saw how a lot of the ways that they put data behind things was fluffy stuff that they could have thought about, and they put data behind it. And so I was like, wow, we can do that too. And it's going to make sense. And so that's why, my first grasp of how to do that came about during my Six Sigma certification.
Wonderful. Thank you. Andreas, good to see you.
Good to see you, Minola. Last time, we just saw each other a week ago, right? So yeah, it hasn't been that long this time around. So Andreas, hi everyone, and hi fellow panelists and audience joining from Athens, Greece. I'm the Senior Director of People Ops and Analytics at Preply, which is a tech startup in Barcelona in the US. So what made... I'm not sure it was one thing. I'm not sure I can pinpoint one thing that made me fall in love with analytics. I think I kind of fell into it when it was just starting out, early 2010s, when it started gaining traction, and I kind of fell into it. Had a few projects and my freelance consultancy days, and I saw its power, kind of like Heather just mentioned. I saw its power very quickly. How we could stop relying, my biggest, I guess my biggest takeaway was that, finally we can stop relying on gut decisions, particularly within HR, and actually back that up with numbers. And I could see how much more people reacted to that, how better people reacted to that throughout the business, and how much more, clout you could get very quickly by backing it up with data. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster journey ever since.
Thank you so very much. Super happy it brought you with us today. Trent, welcome.
Hello, Trent Cotton. I'm the Vice President of Talent and Culture for Hatchworks Technologies. We're a high growth tech firm with employees all throughout Latin America and the US. Actually, I came into HR from the line of business, so I was more accustomed to numbers than the touchy-feely stuff. And I love the quote from William Denning that in God we trust and everyone else must bring data. So my minor was statistics and finance. So I've always kind of been a data guy. I like it because for me, the curiosity of what is the data telling me? You know, I try not to go into it with any kind of hypothesis that I'm trying to prove or disprove. I just really want to hear what are the numbers trying to tell me, and then making executive decisions or recommendations based off of that.
Wonderful. Michael, good to see you. Welcome to our People Analytics Conversations.
Thanks. It's great to be here. My name is Michael Apilano. I am a HR operational excellence lead at Google. I'm on their strategy and operations team that's supporting most of our frontline HR organization. I would say my path is a little different in how I got into analytics. I've been in HR for about 20 years and kind of like did a bunch of COE roles like recruitment and comp and ER. And then the other half was as an HR VP. But what I did find, similar to what Andres said, was you're way more influential and have more credibility when you can get away from just the gut decisions and using data to inform decisions. And most of the time, I find if you have data, people are happy to make the decision. Follow your recommendation, but it's just how do we do that? So as I got more into HR, especially over the last 5 years, I would say is I'm kind of chasing this vision now of like using insights, like building that company insights muscle, so that we can bring like small company agility to like a larger enterprise, right? And I think by getting insights and getting information at the right time, like that's something that's possible. But that's kind of like a vision I'm chasing, and I think the best way to get there is through being really familiar with both quantitative data, but also when and how we use the qualitative data as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. And Rod, so happy to see that weather and internet connection allows you to be with us today.
I know, it's very good. Yeah, so I'm Rod Hutchings. I'm a director at Kyndryl. I'm also in the Air Force from Australia in Melbourne. So I'm in the Royal Australian Air Force as well as a people leader in the Air Force. What I love about data, I have sort of multi hats. So and another thing I do is I'm a high performance coach in national volleyball, and I love being a user of data. It's so informing to help, in particular, improve high performing teams. I think a key thing in the Air Force is certainly is about you plan what you're going to do, you go and execute, and you're going to go and debrief it. And debriefing the activity that you've done, and you're being informed by data, by video, just makes it so much richer and helps improve. So that's a real key thing for me. It's just using data to help improve. We use data extensively in the national volleyball, where you're looking at and it's just an example where you're looking at what the good elements and bad elements of how a player's playing, how the team's playing. You can just adjust from that. So it's really powerful. That's me.
It's a real joy to have you all here, and I just want to encourage people in the comments, do drop us links to all the resources that you have found particularly helpful and meaningful on your data and people analytics journey. And if it's a book, if it's an article, if it's another kind of resource, just drop it in the comments, and let's make this topic more lovable for our extended community. Now, I am fully aware of the fact that if we go down the route of what data and what kind of analytics, we will be here for the next 3 months discussing those. Taking it a bit higher up, in order for HRBPs to have a strategic take to analytics, what kind of data competency maturity level would they need? I'm not even sure how to word it, because we have so many maturity models out there: data literate, data wizard, data whatever. So from a standpoint of how complex and sophisticated their overall data expertise should be, how would you explain that to someone who's like, I want to go into it, where do I start? I don't know enough.
Well, I think first let's talk a little bit about the elephant that's in the room. It's funny, I told this story in a previous panel that I took over a small team whenever I was working for a bank of HR business partners, and in one of my one-on-ones, one of the new team members said that they were slightly terrified to be working on my team because they knew how much I liked data. And I said, what data's not scary, you know, I'll help you with it. And she says, I went into HR because I didn't like math, but I like business. I said, well, you're screwed because the industry's changing. And I think the pandemic really forced a lot of HR companies to grow up and grow into data, because that was the only thing that we could trust. So I think that if you're trying to figure out like how to get started, just start with being able to read a P&L. That's just understanding the business is going to help you be able to be a better business partner, and it's also going to establish some great credibility with you. And then from there, just partner with your business. What are the metrics that they are most interested in from a business side? And then take the time to equate that over to the people side. That's really where you're going to, again, establish a lot of credibility. And for me, it helps you have an intricate knowledge of how that business works from a talent perspective.
I'll add on to that as well. I think that a real key thing is just being able to, so there's a lot of data produced, is to be able to communicate that, to be able to simplify the data and be able to talk to it, provide insights to your team, just being able to have compelling narratives that relate to your business can be quite powerful, I think, is a real key point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the data storytelling, you want to build that competency, but at the same time, you're building your technical competencies. Because you have to be able to show that impact and what's the problem we're trying to solve, right? And so you have to be able to use that data and distill it, because the leaders you interact with, or you have HR VPs, or whether it's some of their biz leaders, you have to be able to translate that knowledge. And so ultimately, it's the impact you can make. And then also just being really kind of curated with the data that you're sharing, right? Whenever you have a presentation, like every piece of data on that slide or on those slides has to earn a place. And so you don't want to overload them with data as well.
Heather, I see you unmuted, please.
And I'll just build on that as well. I used to, or one of my sayings is, check my math, but trust my logic. So I don't hug spreadsheets all day long. I really value the brains that can, or that have the ninja tools that actually know how to do the different analysis. But my superpower is I understand the business and I can make a connection for a logic of what might be happening, and maybe some, ways, HR products that might help in that respect. So if you're not a spreadsheet junkie, or you didn't grow up and love and want to be a comp and person, and you're still now concerned, there's still hope. Just make sure you know your superpower. You've got a close-knit group of people that can help you with the math and the analysis, and use your data, your insights to help with the data that others have produced.
I think that's such a great point, and I'll build on that. But maybe that's something you were going to discuss later as well, Minola. But I think before we look at the individual, we have to look at the system as well, right? That the system that supports our what we call HRBPs, and for the purpose of today's discussion, right? So I think the system so far has always been very, very very driven by centers of excellence, right? Which were very separate and disparate, right, in the world of HR. So an HRBP sat with a business. If they wanted something, they would go to a COE and say, I want this piece of analysis, right? Then I would get it back. Then it would inevitably get translated in the wrong way. And there was this disconnectedness, right? So I think what we do need in a business is to look at the system that drives the HRBP to be successful, right? And for me, that requires things like very interconnected, what would you call a pod or a solution center, where everybody works together on a problem, right? And I also use the analogy, and you know, Heather was right. You need like the team. Use the analogy of engineering, right? So you have full stack engineers, right? They can work on the whole stack. I think what we need is almost like full stack HR professionals as well, right? That have very deep expertise in their domain. Maybe it's their department or specific area of the business, but they also have wide expertise in all other domains, and they're not just reliant on that COE. And how does that work? Well, they need to sit with that COE day in and day out almost, right? To solve those problems together. And inevitably, by powers of osmosis, and I've seen that happen in smaller businesses, by osmosis, you kind of start to build up. As you see those experts build up the models, whatever it is, you start being much more comfortable with them as well.
I really love the point that Michael made in the first round around quantitative data and qualitative data. So let's spend a few minutes and really look at what quantitative data and what qualitative data do we need, and how do we marry these two to bring meaningful data analytics into a people strategy. And Michael, since you inspired this question, then please be the pioneer for the answers for this one.
Yeah, happy to. I would say on a high level, most of the time I'm using quantitative data is to identify like what's happened in the past and what were the contributing factors to that, all those elements. When I use qualitative data, it's more to figure out why something is happening, what those solutions are. And to give you a quick example, like when I was an HRBP one time, and we used quantitative data to find out, like, out of all of our divisions, like which one had the worst turnover rates. So that was our main area of focus. And as we were going through a cultural shift, we're doing kind of switching from a compliance-based HR to more and more of a culture of like coaching and being a consultant. There was one point where a lot of HR problems going on. The SVP wants to kind of like just like, hey, let's fire everybody, like just get in there and start doing it. I'm like, no, we have to coach these directors to be able to do that, right? And this, I never forget this, because what he told me was, he's like, the house is on fire and you're washing the windows, right? And as an HR person, that really hurts your, like your heart there of like, in the long term, this is the best way to go. So fast forward a year later, pull up the quantitative metrics again, and and we were able to see that the attrition in that division is what had the most dramatic increase, almost double of all the other divisions, right? And we want to kind of using that as a blueprint for the rest of the company or the rest of the divisions. I say that because the quantitative data helped us identify where the pieces were that we had to focus the attrition in one division, and then it allowed us to measure success over a year. But it was the qualitative that told us like what exactly we had to do, and then how do we deliver that to the rest of the company so we could have the same impact. Without the quantitative data, that leader would still be saying this HR person was washing the windows while a house is on fire. But because we're able to track that success, now that's a lesson learned for the SVP of like, yep, the long, this short-term investment is worth the long-term gain. So that's kind of used like the way I use quantitative and qualitative data.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer, Michael. I think really what you're saying is the combination of both really get to a full picture. And I think what I heard you say is that qualitative data really helps bring out the human element, provides context for that quantitative data, which is so correct. And I think the qualitative data, it can help you identify metrics, trends, but then essentially with the qualitative, what I like to get out of is just to evaluate and uncover sort of new areas for improvement just through, having those conversations, insights, with the teams of employees. Point.
Yeah, I really, I love the example, Michael. I think really cool example. I think I'll just add two things on Rod and Michael. I think one is, and again, I think I made this point in a couple of other panels, is that when people analytics came about, a lot of the business saw it as a resolution to all of their people in HR problems with numbers, right, as in the panacea, right? We're just going to apply numbers and all of the problems you have in HR will disappear. And of course, what you're forgetting is that that's not the case, right? We are still dealing with people. We're still dealing with behaviors. We're still dealing with unpredictability, right? So really, there's no question about using quantitative versus qualitative. You have to balance because of the type of data that we're dealing with, right? My second point, though, is that it's become easier over the years, right? I remember, back 10, 15 years ago, doing my MBA thesis, which was on with qualitative data, and they were crap systems, right? I remember having to enter, trying to do thematic analysis on, I don't remember, a tool from the 80s, right? And it took me days and days and weeks to get any sorts of insights, right? Nowadays, right, even if you don't know how to code, right, there are a variety, an array of tools that can do this for you, right? Most of I'm sure all of us, the panels are using some sort of engagement surveys, right? All of these cool tools in the market, they'll give you all of that straight away. They'll give you your thematic analysis, they'll give you your sentiment analysis, right? It's actually accurate nowadays, right, compared to before. So there's no excuse anymore not to do qualitative because we have an array of tools to do it as well. Pretty easy.
And I'll build on that. One of my mentors, Audrey McGuckin, so I'll attribute it to her. She always talks about data plus a conversation equals an insight. So there's a formula that uses your quantitative, your qualitative, and that's really the only way you get into more insight-based analytics is through both. And conversations matter. Feedback matters. The other part is that it also helps plant those seeds so that when you decided, okay, here's what we're going to do, you brought them along on the journey with you. As much as the quantitative, I just love a good number and want to just, run with it. If you don't take the qualitative side as well, you'll never get to the actual change.
Anything to build on this? So in just the previous conversation, it's very fresh in my head. One of the panelists said that data doesn't lie based on the information that you put into your analysis. So I really would like to hear your thoughts about how do we make sure that we have data integrity and high data accuracy. I can't pronounce this word to save my life. So how can we really build data-informed people strategies when sometimes the integrity and the accuracy of our data needs significant attention and significant improvement? Let's see who wins the unmuting competition for this round.
I think that what you're talking about is, I think data always needs improvement. There's just so much data, isn't there? So it's about, one key thing is just acknowledging the fact that there likely are data issues, and again, that part of the issue, the point around also leveraging quantitative and qualitative, you sort of validate the conclusions that you draw from the data. In terms of data integrity, I guess it's really key. Is how do you audit the data? Like, I'm actually going through an audit of data at the moment for the Air Force, and there's so many different sources of data, about people and locations, just very basic stuff that people have just generated. So you need to be able to, look at what's there. How do you clean and validate that? It's really important to get to a baseline of integrity of the data. But as you're going through that journey, you still need to be using the data, and that's what I sort of come back to, just being transparent and being clear about what are the issues or risks around the data that you have. You sort of need to start with high level analysis before drilling down into much detail, as well as you go to try to clean and get that integrity strengthened. So that's some my points. Pass it over.
Yeah. Absolutely agree. I'll jump in there. Absolutely agree with Rod. I guess I'll be a little bit more practical with my answer, giving up. I also kind of run ops and run systems, and I'm lucky in the way that I get to run systems alongside the analytics. And for me, it also again goes back my previous point about systems and going back to the root causes why you don't have the right data. And a lot of the times, the reason why you don't have the right data is because you either don't own the systems that hold the data, you were never part of the implementation team that implemented that systems that holds the data. You were never asked for an opinion how that data should be structured, how it should be held, how it should be built in the tables in the back end so you can export into your data warehouse and then into your visualization tool, right? So again, all those decisions that are made way before you even get to the analytics part, they matter, right? They matter, and they matter a lot. Right. So the earlier you can get either, from the start where you're implementing those systems which will hold the data, the better. And the ownership matters as well. We still see businesses where HR systems sit with IT, right? And IT manages them. IT has the access, IT has the implementation, but IT doesn't understand that in order to calculate attrition, certain tables need to be built in a certain way in the back end, right? And they will then, it's not their job to get that, right? So I think it's very, very important to understand the practicalities of those systems, right? The actual system doesn't matter most of the times. It can be big system or small system, it doesn't matter, right? The same problems. The practicalities of implementation and the setup really matter, and that ownership matters. So the more people from HR that can get involved in it, including the business partners, or the business partners are critical in this, right? Again, I've seen a lot of the times where systems teams have implemented a system and they never checked in with the business partner what kind of data their business will require. And at that point, it all falls over again. So again, it should be a joint effort to do that. And then from that point, I believe data accuracy, should increase. And as per Rod's point, you need to continue checking it again and again and again.
I like to use almost like a design thinking process whenever handling this whole data integrity, but also, to what Andreas was saying, kind of the end product. Because if you have data building something to be visualized to the client, it's not going to be great. But if you have HR trying to say, this is what we need, and this is where I think the data is, trying to overtalk the data nerds, and I'm one of those, so I can say it, it's not going to go well. So if you kind of work through a design thinking of, okay, what's our hypothesis? What problem are we trying to solve? What are the data points that we need? Where are these data points? Now let's pause and let's see the data integrity of these before we move forward and start talking through what does the visualization look like? How does it need to be communicated? What's the timeline? And if you follow that, it's just you have all the right people in the room. Everyone is trying to go with the same problem statement, rather than what happens most of the time is you have 4 different pods all working on the same thing, and it's just an absolute cluster. And who doesn't benefit is our end client, who gets something that goes, this is trash. This doesn't tell me anything. And then that's whenever they start going, well, I'm going to go with my gut because your data is false.
I'll build on that. Nobody said AI tools yet. But I'll just throw it out there. Being in a startup, I get to experiment with some things. Data integrity for me, I can count every belly button every day. So I've been at the large company now, I've been at the smaller scale, but I would say there are some pretty cool data quality tools. I think LightUp is coming to mind as one of them, but you can, start to use some things like that. The error proofing, back to my Six Sigma days, as we're starting to build systems and data feel like, how are we making sure we're getting error proofing at the beginning, and definitions. To me, that's like the biggest one, is that the data's not wrong. Everybody had a different definition and we're using it differently. And that's where the integrity of it. So those are my 3 things. Use some AI tools, try some things out, see what you got, even though don't do that with your personal information, proprietary information. Don't do that yet. Make sure you've got some good error proofing when you think about your data, and then make sure those definitions everybody that's using the data is using it with the same definition of mind.
And that's a great best practice that I think enough companies don't do is, even if it's just a spreadsheet that's got all the raw data and it's got all the different charts on there, that first tab should be your definitions. This is turnover is calculated by this. Everybody assumes that they understand how turnover is calculated. I cannot tell you how many times I have to explain the difference between retention and turnover. They're not the same thing. And you can't minus one from one and say, oh, well, they're the other. It's not always that way. So I love that advice, Heather, about making sure that you kind of put that nomenclature on the front end so everyone's speaking the right language or the same language.
I kind of
one other point that sorry, I hadn't mentioned and just thought about was like once we get the data right, what we need to have is really good data governance as well. Like how do we create guidelines about what we're collecting, why we're collecting it, where, who decides what fields to have in tables, all that sort of stuff. How do we bring together the teams that so we don't end up with this sprawl of with data? Once again, once you've actually got integrity improved, how do you keep it that way? So it just needs to be by intentional governance is a key thing, I think.
Michael.
Yeah, I kind of had a different take on the question because I was just looking at the screen of becoming a strategic HR business partner. So I try to think about it from their lens, and I think one of the most common ones you can't control when data changes is engagement surveys, which Ron, I think you mentioned, right? Oftentimes they'll change a question or two, right? And so if you're talking about how somebody feels about their manager, right? We can ask that 5 million different ways. And sometimes they'll change that over a period of three or 4 years. That question will change, and so therefore your data changes. You can't do an apples to apples comparison any longer, right? But as an HRBP, you sometimes you have to get comfortable with directional knowledge, right? No matter how we ask it, we know that the employee's perception of their manager or favorability towards their manager has been declining over the last 4 years, right? And that's, as an HRBP, that's the kind of story you want to go with and kind of talk about, right? That's your supporting evidence. And then I find, like, when you're really constrained for data, using it as an indicator or just really relying on the pieces you can count on. So almost any system, right? You can count on that the merit increases are going to be accurate. Their demographic information is going to be, their tenure, like all that stuff is going to be accurate. So how do you use that data to kind of get your foot in the door kind of as a starting point? And from an HRBP perspective, I remember there was a company joined. They didn't even have any kind of HCM system. So there was nothing. It was just a homegrown system. But they had all this stuff we talked about, and we're trying to create a talent management strategy, right? And so all we did was take the merit increases over the last 5 years and compare them to the performance ratings, and we were able to show the executive team of, hey, there's a lot of anomalies here where you're rewarding poor performers, and then our high performers aren't being rewarded with merit increases. And of course they had, well, it's because of this and because of this. But then, a week afterwards, they're knocking on the door saying, hey, we think we need a formal, I think you're right, I think we need a formal talent management system because you kind of uncovered stuff, right? It didn't take a whole lot of data, and the data integrity they had wasn't very good because it was a homegrown system. But the piece you could rely upon still allowed us to kind of make some movement. So if you're really in a pinch as an HR business partner, I would say either use directional data or use data you can really count on and just build from there. And then, the more you kind of make your case, then you start to get resources around data and how do we get it, all that stuff. But you need some early wins sometimes.
We are quite a few minutes into the second half of our conversation, and we will aim to wrap it up just a little bit under 1 hour, making sure that we can get some extra water, coffee, ice cream as we will move from one panel to another. I do want to bring with me one question. So a few panels ago, someone dropped in the comments like, this all sounds, terribly inspiring, but it sounds like work for a team under the HR function. So how about those people who are in a reality of a HR function team of one? And I made it part of my crusade to bring this question into all the conversations and say, wonderful, wonderful, but how does this conversation change if we're talking about an HR function of one? And I will give you a few seconds to let inspiration come. In the meantime, I will remind everybody, no stress, no worries. The conversations are being recorded. You can find them on LinkedIn, on hackinghrlab.io. And also welcome to everybody who joined us later than the actual kickoff of the conversation. So how do we make all this magic happen with one person? Trent, I saw you unmuting yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there for a little while I was kind of the one person, but if I didn't like data, I would definitely find someone in the organization that did. And there's in any organization, it's going to be a finance person, an analyst, or somebody that is just naturally geared toward data. It's a great way too for you to kind of build some relationships with the SMEs that are already in the market. And the other thing that I've found is that whenever the information comes from the line and all I'm doing is interpreting it, it seems to have a little bit more credibility, because they can't look at me and go, hey, you're just an HR guy. I don't lead with my credentials a lot of times, but you're just an HR guy. I think your data is wrong. Well, it may be wrong, but your guy pulled it for me. So let's talk about the data integrity. And it usually kind of curtails the conversation back to what I actually wanted to talk about, is based on some of the data. Here's some insights. So if you are sitting on an island of one or even an island of two, find that person in the organization that has got a financial mindset. That's usually a great place to start, or at least someone that is dealing with data. A company today cannot run without having someone that is data focused and looking at all the major KPIs and leading indicators in the company. Find that person, be best friends with them, bring them Starbucks, pizza, anything else that they want that's legal, and make sure that you're able to get the information out of them. And also take the time to learn what they're doing. That's a great way to train yourself as well.
I'll get better in analytics for Starbucks, just saying.
I think if it's one, you've really got to really hone in on what are the priorities, like what are the goals of the business, what data is most relevant. So you can't do it all, can you? So really hone in on those priorities so you can not be overwhelmed with all the different things you can do, and then just focus on a few metrics, a few analysis at first, rather than try and look at everything. And you've got to obviously consider the context of the organization about what's important, what's most effective. Really, ultimately, the goal of getting any data is really about informing conversations, informing decisions, driving actions. And so what actions, what's the priority for the business? That was key for that.
Being a HR of two, HR team member of two, I'd say that it's even more important for me to spend time, because it's like, where do I burn my calories? And so having some of that data, it becomes even more important now. I love the, find your friends, because who knows the talent better in our organization? We do. So we know who to find. The org's pretty transparent to us in that respect. So I love that one. And then the other one is, we already have, even the tool I use today, Bamboo HR. It already has some data built into it. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm not trying to make it jazzy like Workday. I'm using what I got. And then once we mature a little bit more, maybe I'll use something else. Or, I might sit in on a demo of something that has data, and I'm like, hey, can you run my data through that and then I take that and use that in the organization. So use all the gifts and the tools that you naturally have. But it's even more important if you're an HR person of one to use data.
I mean, not much to add to Heather and Rod's point. I think priority is very key. I mean, I guess the one thing I would maybe disagree is that if you're an HR team of one, you probably have too many things to worry about, and not forecasting attrition or building an attrition model or something like that. You've got got compliance, you've got payroll on your plate, you got to pay everybody, you got to make sure that you've got compliance, you've got policies, but having said that, I do agree with Heather. This is probably the first time I've heard Workday being referred to as jazzy. That's pretty cool. They'll be happy with that. Right?
Andreas, I thought the
not...
same exact thing. I was like, maybe I just misheard her.
Yeah, I hang on, misheard it. I having implemented Workday
Welcome
once.
to my
That's
world,
not an
guys.
experience.
You'll be a convert if you have to go down to the other tools. You'll be like, wow, Workday was jazzy.
Oh, I'm using Bamboo now, and we're just changing Bamboo because I'm not a fan of Bamboo. I hope there's no Bamboo people in the audience. I shouldn't be saying. Let's not devolve to name calling. But in any case, there is so much out there. Heather is so right. Like Heather's already mentioned AI, and AI is such a broad term. But even for simple things, right, I think AI can help a lot. The only thing I will add is also communities, right? Communities of people. I've never been an HR person of one, but I have been a people analytics team of one. I've started in now and in my previous couple of companies, the first people analytics leader on the ground. And what I can say, what helped is those communities out there that have people that have done it and are willing to share with you. So kind of like what we're doing now, but one-on-one, right? As the number of times I've shoot off a LinkedIn message to somebody or an email and say, look, I want to do this and this. I see you've done it. It's on your LinkedIn profile. I've spied on it, right? Tell me how you did it. 99% of times, a great community HR, by the way, 99% of times somebody would have done it already and they will tell you how to do it. So you're not an island, right? There is so many people out there that can do it. Use them, right? Don't be afraid to use those communities and just shoot off random message to people and say, can I help, right? Can you help me, right? And of course, then reciprocate. Don't forget to reciprocate.
Andreas, that's a fantastic idea. I reached out to someone on LinkedIn. I just said, hey, have you ever run into this issue? And they're like, yeah. I said, did you solve it? Yeah. Here's a template. Like, sent a template over. Like, the whole damn thing was built. Like, I was prepared to work the entire weekend just to get this cranked out. And someone I had never met, never spoke to on the phone, was like, yeah, here's a way to solve your problem. So that's fantastic advice.
I have a do and a don't. So I would say the don't would be just showing descriptive data, like we have X amount of employees, we have X amount of locations, because it's not going to really provide a lot of value. A lot of work to put it all together, but not a lot of value. What I would do though is, like, and this is kind of how I see how our role is changing over time. Where like 20 years ago, we were the expert because we had all the data, right? And now there's so much data and there's so much capability. That's not really the problem, right? And so now I think our role as experts, right, is being able to clearly identify the problem. And so if you have limited time, it's finding out, like, let's say the HRBP or business leader says, hey, we have a problem with attrition, we need to solve it. By digging into some data and saying, well, it sounds like the manager capability portion, like, we're getting really bad reviews on them. So we don't have an attrition problem. We have a manager capability problem, right? And be able to identify that problem is what's going to bring a lot of value to the business. And so if you don't have a lot of time to focus on data or kind of different things, it's kind of like, how do I, what's clearly the problem that I can communicate back to the leader? And then something that I do is, of course, give me your thoughts, right? Like, I don't have the solution yet, but give me your thoughts. I want your input on how to solve this problem as well. So you don't have to have it all resolved in a nice bow at that point. You're just saying, here's the problem. I want your feedback. And then I'll come back to you. It buys you some time to, as Trent said, get some other resources to pull some other data, but it gives you some time, and they know that you're thinking about the business. So that would be good.
Now, for anyone who wants to take this conversation and they feel inspired and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna go out and design the best data-informed strategy for HR and ops that has, ever existed. Here's a question. Where do I start? And I love, Michael, with a do and a don't, where you don't start equally. And let's start this one like we started the conversation. Heather, would you lead us into this?
Sure. A do for me is what interests either the CEO or the C-suite should fascinate you. I've had where CEO is like, I'm really wanting to get more insights into the strength of teams. Why do some teams perform better than others? Can you help me? That's our trigger of, okay, we're now being invited into a more strategic conversation. So I would prioritize, how do I help give them some insights or some data that would help them there? The don'ts is trying to boil the ocean. Like that, hey, let me just cram a bunch of my dashboard to all the leaders every month so they can see all the things and not really have the context behind it. So it just looks like we're bombing them with data. So that's my do and don't.
I would say what I do is, when you're creating data-focused solutions, the crunching of the data, like pulling all the data, putting it together. There's the analysis, right? Where are the trends and where are the connections we're seeing? And then there's delivery, like the impact it's going to have, and bringing it home. It's unusual for someone to be strong at all three. So I would find out like which of those pieces you're really strong at and then dive into there. And then for a don't, what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't use data as a crutch. And what I mean by that is, in speaking kind of to the HRBP audiences, you're going to be given data, and then you also have to use your HR knowledge to make the call on how to use that data. And if you feel it doesn't make sense, it's okay to challenge that and look at it again and go back to your resource. But ultimately, you got to make a call on the path forward. And so data is there to help you, but it's not the solution that's off the shelf. Like you're also gonna have to incorporate your own perspective on it. And so, don't omit that part of it, right? Don't use data as a crutch.
I'll jump in and maybe combining a bit of Heather and Michael in that. Yeah, I think starting small, and I think if you're starting out, you'll really find a problem or question that exists in the business that you can actually help. To start small on a problem where you can add value to. So you really, don't try to solve. You can't solve everything at once. And then being able to define that problem and get data for it. I think it's really important then to socialize the success, the value that's been brought by having that data, so that then you can get better support and momentum to go further with your data analytics.
I used to tell candidates where they were interviewing for a COO that I supported that because he was very, very data focused. And I would tell them, look, he wants to know that you know how the watch works, but he doesn't want to know how it's made. He doesn't want to know about every gear. Don't walk into, now if he asks about a gear, dig into it, but let him drive the conversation. I think that a lot of times, especially HR people that get over that data hump and kind of get that first little boost of confidence, they want to tell you how the sausage is made. And that's not what the leader wants. Give them the insights, ask them the questions, like the other panelists said, but be prepared to get into the nitty gritty if you need to, but only bring it out if they ask. Because I found, unfortunately, sometimes I do get in the nitty gritty and it causes more questions, which causes more work, which causes more analysis. And then I start the whole process over again. So it's to help you kind of stay on track, and data sometimes will lead you to parts of a story that'll make you chase a rabbit hole. And it's easy to do, especially for people probably like all of us on here. We'll go, well, what does that mean? And we start kind of pulling that thread, and we'll lose years of our life trying to solve the question. So I would say do stay focused and do know your audience. And don't always start with, here's the first gear and let me tell you how all of them work, because a lot of times leaders don't care.
Yeah, I cannot overstate like how right all of my panel members are. I think we're all effectively saying very, very similar things. So all I will add is a helpful tool I use to do exactly what kind of Heather, Trent, and Rod and Michael to degree stated. Not to overcomplicate things from the very beginning. I would use a very easy 2x2 matrix for this project, which is, your impact and complexity matrix, right? So high impact, low complexity, high complexity. The don'ts is always, I've seen a lot of times, people jump into your high impact but high complexity projects, right? As in, oh wow, I've heard, that ONA, organizational network analysis, really works. Let me do some organizational network analysis and show everyone how it all matters. And then you end up spending 3 or 4 or 6 months on it, and nobody cares because you never asked in the first place, right? So always, you should always start on probably low impact, low complexity, get a quick win in, like Heather said, right? But then get straight into, especially if you're a team of 1, right? Or 2 or 3, get into your high impact but low complexity stuff, right? Quickly and efficiently, right? Fast path to action. Ask what the problem is, right? And then get it done quickly, and then move on. So I think that's the do, and that's the matrix I use. The don'ts, and I think one more don't, which I'll almost disagree with myself on my previous statement. Sometimes, we talked about communities and asking people what they've done. Sometimes you can get too much of that. You will read people analytics thought leaders and listen to them and read articles, etc., and be over excited by say, oh, I can do that, right? I can do that. That definitely, him, her, and so say we should do this in our business. What you tend to forget is every business is different, right? Every business is different, and what works in one area or multiple areas might not work for you, right? So again, returning to Heather's point, ask, right? Ask your CEO, right? Ask if you're lucky enough to speak to him or her, all right? Ask him what you need and get that done. Don't just listen blindly to, people like us, right? To tell you what to do.
Well, it is so painful and frustrating to say that we are almost 5 minutes away from saying goodbye, and let's do a wrap up round. And I asked this question in the previous panel, and I am giving heads up to if any speaker from the next panel is listening. This is my wrap up question for the day, so get ready. There is this amazing book, and I am mentioning it also as an acknowledgement to the fact that October is Wellbeing and Mental Health Month. And the book is called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? So I am sure that on your people analytics journey, you discovered at least one thing, and that discovery was frustrating and painful. And when you discovered it, it was like, well, yeah, why nobody has told me this before? So consider this the wrap-up question. What is that one thing that you wish someone told you before you discovered it, and you want to share it with our audience today? What we will wrap it up counterclockwise from where we started. So we will have our man from the future, Rod, going first, and then we go counterclockwise. Rod, ready to go?
Sure. So I think, it's been mentioned before, but I think just seeking out help, asking for help, seeking out communities, people just want to help. So don't just try to solve it on your own. There's a big community here, and people are just willing to help. So that's a key thing.
Thank you. Michael.
Actually, expanding on a point I made earlier, and I think I know I learned a lot from mistakes. So I figured I would share a mistake. No one told me that about, so I say don't use data as a crutch. It was like a real life example where I did. I had limited time to create a solution or a response on data, and very short amount of time to do it. Didn't have enough time, and based on what the data says, that's the recommendation I gave. And if I were to go back in time, I would have used my HR background and context and knowledge of the subject to say, or know what the data is saying, but here's what I think, right? Afterwards, that's a lesson I learned. But no one ever told me that, as you kind of continue to use that as a kind of influence. But that was a really important one for me to know, and I wish I would have knew ahead of time.
Thank you so much. Trent.
This is hard for me because I know everything. So totally kidding. I think for me, I wish I would have known, because whenever I started in HR, people analytics really wasn't a thing. I was the weirdo that came from the business, thought about things from a business standpoint. I wish I would have jumped into it earlier and had more confidence. So, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of HR practitioners out there that have the knowledge. They just maybe have boxed themselves in mentally. So I wish I would have known that I should have taken the leap and been a lot more ahead of the curve than I was.
Thank you. Andreas.
I wish someone told me the people were so complicated. I would have become an accountant instead, and probably had less headaches. But actually, taking that joke and maybe on a more serious point, I wish someone had told me that what we do actually has impact as well, right? I think we always forget that the numbers we run has impact not just on the P&L or the balance sheet, but in many cases on people's lives, right, and livelihoods. When I was younger, I don't think I understood that fully. I do now, I think, and a few experiences lately. So I think I take that responsibility a bit more serious now, right? And I think I wish I had done that before as well.
Thank you so much. Heather.
Yeah, a piece of advice that I did get early on was being right isn't enough. So having the data isn't enough. What I wish I'd known was, and I talk about this whenever I've got an opportunity, is making data consumable. So yeah, we are on the right path most likely with what we're recommending. And what could trip us up is, have we thought about it in the eyes of that business leader or that HR function or whomever we're presenting that data to? Have we made it consumable from their lens? And a lot of times I'll take data that is meant for a business lens and say, okay, how can I turn this around from an employee lens, how they would consume this data? And that helps me then come at it a couple of different ways. So that's my big thing, is being right's not enough. Make it consumable. And I love to have conversations around how to do that. That would thrill my heart if people reached out to me and asked me for more info or a specific about their issue.
This has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. So Heather, Andreas, Trent, Michael, and Rod, I could not be happier and grateful for having a front row seat, at sharing your thoughts. Thank you everybody for being here. I do hope that I get to welcome as many of you back into the next conversation in literally a couple of minutes. Trent, I know I will see you, so everybody else just stock up on water, coffee, tea, ice cream, whatever keeps you happy and focused. And I hope that I will get to see you on my screen very, very soon. Thank you so very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third conversation, the last conversation in our day 3 of the virtual summit, Becoming a Strategic HR Business Partner. Also, the third edition. So I guess this is a triple 3 lucky conversation, and it's one that I was most looking forward to because it touches on an amazing topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I'm a journalist by trade, so whenever I hear about storytelling, I am like a kid going to the candy store. So we will spend the next hour talking about communicating with data. And this is something that naturally popped up in all the conversations, whether throughout this summit, and even more so during our last week's summit of People Analytics. We have an amazing lineup of speakers. So Barbara will help me bring them on stage. And while they pop up on the screen, I will just say, again, a warm welcome to everybody in the audience. Do let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. That's always a curiosity we have, just where we touch people in this wonderful world. And also a very, very warm encouragement to consider the chat your own conversation space. So do drop your answers, your thoughts, your opinions on the questions that you hear raised within the panel, but also do drop questions. I am sure that I am not the only one who will keep a lens and an eye on the chat, and we will super happily bring highlights into our own conversation. Also, use the chat to share with us and with the community at large whatever resources you have found particularly helpful and meaningful in your work, in your journey to becoming an HRBP and a people analytics aficionado. So books, courses, articles, anything else, if it has a link, it goes into our chat. Now, enough of this blabathon. Let's make the best out of our amazing hour together. So, you know the drill. E-mic goes around clockwise as you are on my screen. Very, very short introduction. And when you hear communicating with data, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Trent, it's been a minute, literally. We also shared the previous panel, so good to see you.
I know, long time no see. Trent Cotton, Vice President of Talent and Culture for Hatchworks Technology. We're a high-growth tech firm providing digital solutions to our clients, and we have employees in Latin America and throughout the U.S. So whenever I think of telling a story with data, mine's a little bit different, and I hinted at this at the previous panel, is that I like to listen to the story before I try to tell the story with data. I think probably a mishap that I did early on is I was trying to validate a story with data, and now I've kind of taken a little bit of a backseat to hear what is it trying to tell me, and then going forward with insights based off of that.
Thank you so very much. Anu, good to see you. Welcome.
Good to see you too. Thank you. My name is Anu Mandapati, and I'm the Global Head of Culture and Inclusion at Magic Leap, which is an augmented reality tech company. When I think of data, I love making data-driven informed decisions. And so how do we connect that to people through storytelling? So storytelling is how we connect the quantitative with the actual emotional piece of it. So that's if we want to drive something forward, we've got to have the storytelling piece of it.
Thank you so very much. And I know I am very close from having a Starbucks moment, so I do apologize if I am mispronouncing the name terribly. But let me just say, I feel your pain. I have my name mispronounced or misspelled so often, I sometimes doubt I do it correctly myself. So welcome, Nisane.
Close. You're there. You're this close. It's pronounced Jisane.
Jisane, thank you so much. I learned something today.
Yeah. I've been in HR for 21 years. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources for the American Bureau of Shipping. And most of my role is in a business partner capacity. Right now, I manage an amazing group of men and women that are business partners around the globe. But I will tell you, when I first got into HR, when somebody mentioned data, my eyes rolled in the back of my head, and I just said, "Okay, spreadsheets, blah blah blah." I was just always thought there were smarter people than me. I'm the people person. I get with managers. I keep us out of trouble, things like that. But really, what makes me what I initially think of is how far I've come in terms of the mentality, knowing that unless you have data, you're only getting half of the story. And a lot of our managers, especially if they're technical leaders, if they're an R&D or they're some kind of engineering leader, the data is all that matters. The people, mushy, feely, huggy, touchy, that kind of stuff. You might as well be speaking to a brick wall. But you need to come with data, because you need to figure out a way to combine the people element with the data and be able to show trends so that our leaders can make better decisions.
Thank you so very much. Felicia, good to have you in this conversation. Welcome.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Yes, so I'm Felicia. I am the founder of CPO Playbook, which stands for Chief People Officer Playbook. We're an HR and leadership consultancy. And I'm also a podcast host. So that's also really fun. When I think about data, I think that a lot of times, it's great to have, and I love working with data, but it doesn't always go so smoothly in reality when you're speaking to leaders or even the executive team, and they've either never worked with data or have had poor experiences with data. And so, unless your leadership is on board with understanding and accepting various types of data and the commitment to collect data effectively, it's really hard to get there. So I think that sometimes that's forgotten because we know how data benefits the company so much. But just to kind of reiterate that sometimes it takes leaders, time to get there in order to actually accept that there's a good way to collect it and it takes time. And, there's also very poor ways to collect it. So something to just noodle on, I guess.
Thank you. And Lotus, good to see you in our conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you. I'm Lotus Buckner, and I'm an HR executive and founder and CEO at Talent Remix. And when I think of data, one thing, I love what everybody has said. So you being last to this question is always hard. I think one thing that I would add is I think of data integrity a lot, right? When I think of data, I think of integrity. And the data that you're sharing, and if you're going to tell the story, you're going to share the data with your company or publicly, you have to have integrity behind that. And you have to make sure that your data is strong and that you're honest about what your data tells and what it doesn't tell and where the gaps still are, right? Because you're never going to have all the data in the world to be able to tell the story that you want to tell. Just think about research, right? How many times have you read an article that was like, research shows that blah, blah, blah. Then you actually dig into the research study and it was done on 200 people in the world, right? And so data is really important, and scoping that and being honest about that, I think, is also really important.
Well, I just want to clarify that going last on any round, it only gets more difficult from here. So I wish you all good luck in the unmuting competition. So let's start. But before we go into what data and how do you build a presentation, I'm really wondering, is there some other step before this when you ask some questions maybe around, who's your audience? So how do you start to think about how to design a communication using data? And I promise I'm not practicing, but I have this thing when I go diagonally for the first question. So Gisana, you are our pioneer in this. How do you start to think about a presentation where you plan to leverage data and analytics?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The very first thing you need to understand, well, two really things, is know your audience. Because your audience, whoever's going to be in the room and whoever's the decision maker, they has to be able to easily digest the data. If you're presenting to a guy like me, I need like size 16. I need like size 16 font, and I need big pictures. You come to me with with screenshots of spreadsheets, you've already lost me. However, my more technical individuals, as I mentioned earlier, they thrive off of that. So depending on who the decision maker is and who's going to be digesting that data will determine the outlay of your presentation. The second thing is be clear of what they're looking for. A lot of times HR, we're so happy to be at the table. We're so happy to be invited to that meeting that we just start gobbing all this data to show how awesome we are. And then next thing you know, in 30 minutes in the meeting, the COO is like, okay, what are we talking about? Or is this even what we're here to discuss? So be very clear before you start making awesome Power BI dashboards and pivot tables in terms of what specifically do you need and what is it they're expecting to see from you, and be clear who your audience is. Because the worst thing you can do is come to somebody like me and say, okay, I have 47 financial slides that talks about the year-on-year analysis about, and that'll be me right there. So just to keep that in mind.
Anu.
I think of everything that you just said, Jason, and I think about know, feel, and do, and having that framework. What do I want them to know? So audience is important. What do I want them to know? How do I want them to feel? And then what is it that I want them to do with the information? And so the knowing part of this information, it's how much is enough for them to make a decision or take whatever action without overwhelming them. So, and some people, they're gonna want headlines only. Some people maybe want, what are the main 5 points? And then someone else might want uber details. So if they want to learn more, I would actually show them where that they can actually do that. That would be the know part. The feel is, what is it that we're trying to do here by sharing this information? Is it building a relationship, having them feel more confident with, HR as a business partner? Is it to, maybe there's some change management initiative, and so maybe it's building confidence or trust. So I think it's really important to understand what is it that we want them to feel, and then do. What's the action? What's that next step? So that's, whenever I've done it this way, it's a clear framework. It helps me design whatever content I'm presenting, but it makes it more digestible for the audience as well.
Felicia.
I can go next. By the way, I love what Jason and Ani both said. And oftentimes I think about, there is so much data to collect that it's really critical. And I'm sure many of people have heard this saying before, which is to fall in love with the problem first. I think a lot of people can, run circles around themselves and their peers and their executive team, collecting data and making sure there's integrity, like Lotus said. But collecting data where you understand the problem to the point where you can say on a list, let's say you're collecting like data from a survey could be 20, 30 questions long when it really needs to be maybe 5 questions. And so if you don't understand what the problem is, you really can't understand how to collect the data to really know how to prioritize your resources. So always get clarity on what the problem is, and even where in the organization it's the biggest problem, right? So for example, if you have a company of 50,000 employees and you realize that the problem is really sitting in marketing or engineering or a location, you don't need to collect, data from every country or every function. You might just need to collect it from a specific source. So, always understand what the problem is, define it clearly, and, know where you're really looking to put your efforts. Yeah.
Lotus.
I think for me, when I was listening to Jason's and Anu's response, it made me think of like the scientific method. Putting that together, like you really have to understand the question, right? What is the question you're really trying to solve for? To their points, sometimes when you're working with executives, they don't even know sometimes what they're looking for, right? And what are they planning to do with that data? Because how many times I could never count on my hands how many times I've talked to an executive who wanted specific data, and I ran out and I collected all the data, I did all this analysis, put all this work into it, come to find out that they weren't actually planning to do anything with it. It was just like plain curiosity, right? I would not have put in that much effort. So understanding what the question is that you're trying to answer, but also what is going to be done with that data, what kinds of decisions, if any decisions are going to be made because of it, or any actions being taken, so that you know how much effort to put in, what type of data to get, and how deep you're going to dig, right, for that data. Because with data, you're like my 3-year-old, right? You can just keep asking why and why and why, and just keep digging into the data and get into this huge hole of data and all for nothing potentially, right? So really understanding that I think is really important, and getting into the other steps of researching and doing your actual analysis, building the hypothesis, and then doing your actual experiment with the data, and then having a conclusion and being able to communicate that, I think is really important. So there's your scientific method.
Trent.
Yeah, I'm not following any of that. They took all the answers, so we can go to the next question. I have nothing to add.
Now, I do have a curiosity, and I just want to make Enrique proud that I read the entire title of the panel that also says how to engage business leaders and teams with people, data, analytics, and storytelling. So I am curious, what are the skills and capabilities that make this engagement possible? And extra points are available for skills and capabilities that come outside of the circle of the usual suspects. So is there anything like an outlier skill that comes to mind that HRBPs can use?
Intellectual curiosity. I think that's the biggest one. My fellow panelists kind of walk through the scientific method and starting with the end user in mind. But I know in my experience, I go trying to get an answer for one question, and I realize that one, we're not asking the right question, or two, the data is leading me to something else. And so having that intellectual curiosity and that freedom to kind of chase that rabbit a little bit down the hole, I think is important. And also too, you can go and I'll just kind of give an example of someone that doesn't really like data. They just, give them the highlights. But if you come at them with this fervor and this energy about what you found and the potential impact on the business, like that actual, I call it that oomph, you'd be very surprised at how quickly they turn. And then they want to get into what are some of the details and how did you get to this? What's your thought process on this? And it goes from this adversarial to more of this partner of, hey, we've got this problem and we really need to figure out how we're going to do it. And you start bouncing, kind of matching energy level for energy level. And to me, that's whenever it gets really, really fun.
Well, who sees strengths, energy, and raises their own? Lotus.
I would add that 2 skills. Well, first of all, if you're listening and you heard Trent's answer, steal it, because I think curiosity is one of the best skills you can just possibly have to be successful. But 2, I would add when it comes to data and storytelling is 1 is business acumen, and 2 is being a really good connector, because data, you can be really siloed into the data, right? And then you can be a great storyteller. But if you don't have both of those and you don't understand the business and what you're telling a story about, that can be really challenging. And similarly, being a good connector, being able to take that data and connecting the dots into all of the different areas of the business that data impacts, I think is really important, right? Instead of just looking at your diversity data, for example, or your employee experience survey data and saying, we have increased or decreased engagement in this organization, or saying, we're diverse or we're not diverse, our talent pools are diverse or they're not diverse, actually understanding how do you connect that then to the rest of the business? How do you dive deeper into root causes, right? How does that actually impact revenue, right? The fact that we don't have a diverse workforce, how can I show that that's actually impacting revenue, that there's a return on that, right? So being able to connect the dots, I think, is a really important skill.
I love what Trent and Lotus both shared. And so I was trying to think of what I want to name the skill. So I'm just not, because I can't think of it. Because I can call it quite a few things. So when I think about conversations around data, people get a little nervous sometimes because they don't know what that means. Because if the data shows that we're not doing something or we haven't progressed, so is there shame or blame? So you're coming into it with curiosity. You're connecting the dots, like both Lotus and Trent said. And I think there's just this piece of just like, I'm coming in as a true partner. There's no shame, there's no blame, there's no guilt. We're starting fresh. Here's a starting point. And how are we going to partner together to move forward? So maybe my word then is more partnering.
Well, Anu, back to your, I don't know how to name it. There's an acronym that I learned earlier this year, and I use it in my change work a lot. So in addition to FOMO, fear of missing out, JOMO, joy of missing out, I learned about FOFO, which is fear of finding out. So maybe you were touching on FOFO there for a moment.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's what's the meaning that people are assigning to that if we're looking at the data and it's not showing what we want. Let's not label it. Let's just figure out here's the starting point and moving forward.
Wonderful.
I'll just piggyback right off of Anu. I mean, how many times have we as HR professionals we go out and we do this awesome engagement survey, and then then all of a sudden it gets sliced all to be damned, and next thing you know, it's not even really meant to be. It doesn't even come out to what it's supposed to be because leaders are afraid of finding out. So, well, if we take this group out, what does it say? And if we take this group out, what does it say? And far too often we have a lack of professional maturity in terms of just accepting the data as it is and then make decisions off of that. Now, not to ever give up a chance for extra points. One thing I will say is, you want to, when you're presenting data, especially to senior leaders who should be having a long-term strategic mindset about things, you want to be forward-thinking. Don't just present the data as is. Think about the implications of what you're presenting. If you're showing data that shows that in a particular division we've had increasing levels of year-over-year turnover, and you just show that raw number without understanding like why, why is that turnover? Is it voluntary or is it involuntary? Because those tell two different stories. But you want to make sure that you're looking, you're looking long-term depending on what the topic is. Because sometimes if you just leave data, one of the most dangerous things you can do is leave the leader with data and just walk away. You want to be looking long-term and saying, hey, what is the implications? Make sure it's aligned with what the meaning of the meeting is. And then, think about 2 or 3 steps beyond, like, okay, if I give this data, I know this leader tends to be knee-jerk. Anticipate that and make sure you give enough information for them to make a good decision. And the last thing I would say is know what you're talking about. Sometimes we come into these meetings wanting to push a pet project, right? It's budget time in many companies and we're trying to get our pet projects approved. And we'll show only a slice of data. And then all of a sudden leader says, well, wait a minute, what about this over here? And you're like, well, I didn't think about that. Make sure that before you show up there and you put your PowerPoint up there, know what you're talking about, run the gambit, look at both sides. Don't come in there with your own biases because you have an agenda. And just be as sterile as that data is that you're trying to present. Because if you come in there with a bias and the leader just shoots you down because you only brought half the picture, then your credibility goes out the door, and then your seat at the table might be at risk.
I think those were all amazing, great advice. I think that there's one thing that I think about a lot, actually, is that, having empathy for an executive team, or at least whoever you're presenting for, I think is really important. I mean, imagine, you go into your presentation, you already know kind of what the data says, and people are feeling, low engagement because they're not paid fairly. And is that a valid concern? Absolutely. How do you think that's going to land on the executive, team's agenda when they just bought, had an acquisition and they're at the end of their quarterly, financials, and they're about to, share with shareholders or whatnot. So I think that in order for us to make any progress, having perspective and empathy is really, really important to be able to say, hey, like, we understand that even like this is a problem because of X, Y, and Z, but we also understand it's not going to happen tomorrow. So like, let's make a plan. Like, what does that look like? So I just want to emphasize that executives have real struggles. They are having, real deadlines, and there's a lot on their shoulders. So just having the perspective that we all know that this is a problem, X, Y, and Z is a problem based on the data. And in order to really make things work, we can't demand too much from them, tomorrow. It really needs to kind of ease in the plan in order to actually get it done.
Mm. I see that you wonderful people love a good challenge. So thank you for that. And I'll see what I can do moving forward. We are in the middle of our conversation. So welcome to everybody who joined us a little bit later. And don't worry, this is being recorded. You will get to see the recording on our hackinghrlab.io platform or here in our space on LinkedIn. And what are some of your foolproof tips for presenting data? And, short of having Morgan Freeman narrating voiceover the spreadsheet, how can it be enjoyable and palatable? And in the first panel of today, I did get the request to make the conversation fun. I did my best. But this is our challenge. Do you do anything, or are there specific presentations where you intentionally make them fun? Why and how? So how do you build, what are some of your tips to present data? How do you make them meaningful? And how do you make them fun?
I'll jump in on this. I think anyone who's seen me on a panel knows that I don't take things. I think I could be serious for about 35, 38 minutes, and then I have to crack a joke. So just as an example, I was going over some pretty weighty information. One of the things, just a little tip, is that a lot of times in HR, we just look at the organizational data, which does tell you part of the story. But I also like to bring in, how do we compare against the industry? How do we compare against what's going on in a global or a macroeconomic standpoint? And one of the things I was talking about was the workforce participation rate. And, one of the little doodads that caught my eye was the male participation rate is going down significantly. And so I knew right around this point I was going to start losing people. I wanted to make sure that I kept their attention. So the first slide was the workforce participation rate, because I was trying to explain that, the candidate pool is shrinking, which is why recruiting is taking a lot longer. And I was like, and it's very interesting that, in particular, the male is going sharper on a decline than the female. So, being the nerd that I am, I went and looked it up, and I found them. I found where all of them were. And I had a graph that showed the amount of gaming hours that were spent by males over the same course, and it was going almost directly proportional to the decline in the workforce participation rate. Completely unrelated data, but it got everybody laughing, and I find that doing that periodically, kind of having almost like a commercial break, gets everybody back in. It kind of does a little Control-Alt-Delete for them. Whenever you're presenting data, you said, how do you present the spreadsheets? That's rule number one. Don't present a spreadsheet. Don't present the raw data. Start with the questions. So if I'm doing a deck, if that's what I have to do, here's the question that you asked. Here's the visualization that gives you some of the answers. And here's some of the questions that you didn't ask that are related. These are some of the leading indicators to this lagging metric. Let's talk a little bit about that. So it's question, visualization, and then I open it up for questions. I find that flows a little bit better, and it makes the presentation more conversational versus, kind of sitting through the economics class. which I slept through most of the time.
I see we passed the 35, 40 minutes joke free with
yes.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
I'll jump in right behind Trent here. I mean, well, first thing I would say in terms of best tips for all that is good in this world, make sure your data's clean. Make sure your data is accurate, especially if you have like downstream applications, downstream automated dashboards. You know, a lot of companies have kind of gone away from the whole spreadsheet thing, and they just presented a beautiful Power BI dashboard. I was in a presentation once, and the guy put up a dashboard showing global turnover rate, and in the top right corner there was this nice little number that said 99%. And so he was talking, and he was just like, yeah, and you know, we do this and we do that, and you know, this is the work we're doing, and we're doing all this, and nobody could do anything but focus on that 99%. And everybody's like, well, none of that stuff is working that you're talking about because you're at 99% turnover. Good Lord. And there was some equation, and literally there were only like 1% turnover rate in that particular department. But everything that was done at that point, they were questioning. They smelled blood in the water, and they questioned everything. And so there was a lot of extra judgment that probably didn't need to be there, which made that presenter's job probably 10 times harder. So make sure your data's clean, make sure it's correct. You can have the most beautiful interface in the world, but if it's, you know, junk in, junk out, we all know that. How to make it fun. In case you can't tell, I'm a very casual guy. I like to present stuff. But you have to make sure that it's appropriate. Sometimes there's some conversations that need to be serious. Sometimes there's conversation that you need to get leadership's attention. And if you want to be taken seriously, sometimes, you know, you have to come in there with a serious demeanor. But if you do have the ability in a particular presentation to be fun, I like doing it through imagery. And sometimes they think I'm going to go left and I have a graphic that, you know, something that's completely the opposite. Or I've even had like a kind of like a oopsie slide. So sometimes we're presenting, and if I know that I'm at a point where after these 3 slides of all this data, I may start losing people, I will just have a slide that means absolutely nothing, or it's a picture of me, you know, fishing, and they're like, oh, my fishing pictures got in here. I don't know how that happened. Oops, I don't know. And then people are just chuckling, and it brings them back in. So, you know, there's a lot of great stuff out there. I think Hacking HR, I think we had some additional a couple of months ago to come out great presentation tips. But please make sure you use proper judgment, because not all presentations are meant to be fun. Some there needs to be some gravitas in there.
And I say ditto to both of what was
that
shared.
Let's do this alphabetically, because I saw Felicia unmuting herself 2 seconds before Lotus did. So Felicia and then Lotus, if that's okay. Perfect.
Thanks, Manola. And Lotus, you're going right after me. Okay, you're getting in here. So I there's a couple things that come to mind. So a lot of the times, I might be going a little too deep here, but a lot of the times when I collect engagement survey data or quantitative data, you'll see results, especially like in any technology, like they'll present those results this way, which they'll go from least favorable as the top priority to the most favorable down at the bottom to help you prioritize. However, you actually get a different prioritization if you start with the most unfavorable, because there's a middle section, which is neutral. So I actually like to manually, I feel like I get a kick out of this for some weird reason, but I actually manually look at the data from the most unfavorable, and it becomes a different order. So I don't know if you have data at your companies today, but I would think it would be really interesting to see what that actually looks like. And so I think that the most meaningful is the worst, you know, data that you're collecting, which is the most unfavorable data. And so if you're thinking about, you know, putting a plan together and identifying what are the top 3 things that we need to focus on as an organization based on this data, whenever it is, whether it be quarterly or annually or twice a year. But I think that that's just something that I find very meaningful and would help point your resources in the most give your company the most impact for change. How to make it fun? I think just coming in with a lot of exciting energy and being able to say, we have the data we need to start progressing and moving forward. And I think that sets up a meeting up for success because people are really excited to learn and understand what's happening. And then at the end of a presentation, I definitely don't just present the data. I actually have, hey, here's what we've already come together as peers, and here's what we think we could do. Here are some options of what we can do to solve and how long this would take and what this looks like as estimates and a roadmap. So by the end of the meeting, people can just say yes to something and get excited, to move forward, and knowing that we've, we have it like next day, day 2, we've got our answer, we know what to do. So I guess I'm just kind of like a nerd like that because I get really excited when I just see data, but it doesn't take me that long to make it fun. I understand not everybody's like that, but that's just me. So.
Thank you. Lotus.
I really just want to say that I was stealing Jasani's idea about that oopsie slide. I think that's brilliant to get people get their attention back. It just reminds me of a strategy to use when you have to be the presenter after lunch. That's always a tough crowd, and that's a great strategy. The one thing that I've done that was really fun presenting data, but to John's point, you can't use this strategy all the time because sometimes either your data doesn't allow for it or the conversation really needs to be a serious conversation. But one thing I found that was really fun for my executive team actually when presenting data is if you're able to do a choose your own path. So it kind of, the first time I did it, it kind of happened naturally where I had employee experience data up and one of our executives started digging into his own area, right? Like what happened in finance, and this is what we're struggling with, whatever. So we started digging into it, and we kind of jokingly said, what department wants to go next? And so we just got a lot of great feedback about that presentation of how people got to choose their own path. So that was just one fun way that I've thought of.
Thank you. Anu.
So, Jason, I think you're the winner here with the oopsie slides. So I had a CEO several years ago who would just have random cartoon animals like doing cartwheels and other things, or just slides of that. And that actually captured everyone's attention. They actually paid more attention and got more engaged. So I don't have too much more to add from what everyone else has shared. I was going to just say ditto, but one story real quickly that popped into my head is when we go back to just the data integrity piece of it. Lotus, I love that you had brought that up from the very beginning. My focus is culture and inclusion. So coming in from the DEI side, it's really looking at the data through an intersectional lens. We think that we take our data and we create the story around it, but I always ask, well, what's missing? And so, for example, there's an organization I had partnered with several years ago who said that they'd created a lot of just positive momentum in promoting more women into leadership roles. And then I, of course, start, digging in a little bit more. And there was a specific ethnicity that was the majority of all of these women who are being promoted into these leadership roles. So when we look at our data, are we actually looking at it through many different angles and through an intersectional lens? So it's gender, it's ethnicity, it's sexual orientation, it's, a variety of other demographics. So data, we can use data to tell any story that we want. So for me, the biggest piece of this is having that integrity and really looking at what is it saying, and even if we might get nervous to go there, really taking a look at that, I think, is very important. And again, bringing the fun into it, no matter how serious the topic might be, that's how people will actually remember this and stay connected to it. And so I love those oopsie slides. I think that's great.
This is absolutely wonderful, and I will share also some of the things that I do absolutely plus 1,000 to make sure that as much as we consider humor to be serious business, there are conversations that should be just serious. So last week I was working with 2 teams on looking at the pulse survey results, and we've been working together for close to 3 years now, and we know each other. And I used 2 different covers. One was, you know nothing, Jon Snow, here's the data. And the other one was, brace yourselves, analytics is coming.
I love that.
And a few years back, we were working with a team on a big change and transformation project, and we had a very figure-heavy presentation. And about 10 minutes in, I had this slide with a very small animated meme, GIF, I don't know how you call it, with the minions. And it said, on a scale of 1 to 10, how focused are you right now? And the answer was like, banana. And, you know, it was late on a Friday afternoon and we had a good laugh. But yeah. Felicia, I saw you unmuting yourself. Did you want to add something?
No, I just think that was so creative what you did. That was awesome. I'm stealing that from you.
Please do.
Stolen.
Please do. Now, I'm really wondering, are there any big recurrent presentations that you put together using data? So if you think, you know, across your work, can you think of the most recurrent presentation milestones, 2 or 3? And I have a question with 2 arms. One is, what are the key HR data points that you use? And the second, I'm curious, do you also look for business data points that you use in your HR strategy related presentations? Let's see. Lotus.
I can jump in here. The story that comes to mind for me with business data, right? How do we compare the two? I really love that. I am a big fan of trying to make sure that our HR strategies align with our business strategies. And one example that always comes to mind for me with that is one of my business partners was really struggling with one of her client leaders and departments because their revenue had been down, trending down for quite a while. That wasn't the problem they brought to us, but we were aware of that. And they came to us because they were losing people. Their turnover, their 90-day turnover specifically, was really, really high. And they were trying to solve for that. So my business partner was really struggling because she felt like every idea she threw out there, you know, this leader was kind of quite resistant to it, even though the leader came to us to help solve this problem. Like, every idea we had, that was not the reason she has turnover. Like, it's the staff that's the problem. And, you know, so we finally convinced her to really help us dig into this, right? So we looked at everything. We had to get agreement that this is an open book. Like, this is meant to help you. And when we dug into it, ultimately what we found with the data, so we looked at onboarding data, we looked at the turnover data, we looked at employee experience data, all of it. And what we found, and we did focus groups, so we got data through interviews as well. And what we learned and found out is that it really came down to the root cause is that they had people, this was a multi-site department, and they were bringing people on board and throwing them into the trenches. So they signed up to work at a single location. And by week 2, they were being asked to go to a new location every single day, sometimes an hour away from their home. And people didn't feel like they were ready or onboarded to do that because every single site does things differently. And so they had 1 week of training and then they were thrown to do things differently at every single site. And then their coworkers would get mad at them. And so they just left, right? And what we actually found when we started implementing things as simple as self-scheduling, letting the employees schedule themselves, like this is what the need is, and allowing them to do the scheduling rather than our leader who was already pulling their hair out to do the scheduling. We were able to do that. That helped improve the turnover. We fixed the onboarding. But the coolest part was once we fixed all these things, we sat there thinking that it was just an HR issue that we're helping them solve. Revenue numbers went up. And I purposely asked my business partner to go get that data. And, she was kind of like, well, that has nothing to do with what we're trying to fix. But when we looked at it in the end, we were able to see that trend up as these issues got fixed. So we were able to tie the two together.
Okay, I'll jump in there. So I'll go. First of all, Lotus, that was aggressive. That was a great explanation. A great example, because I mean, when you show the turnover, I mean, once you do it, if you do a really good analysis, you can help the business in so many ways. But to go straight to answer your question, first off, let's be clear. We're here to talk about, overall becoming a strategic business partner. There should be no HR presentations that are not tied to the business. Otherwise, you're just personnel. Right? It doesn't matter whether you're talking about benefit costs. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about turnover or attrition or engagement. It doesn't matter. Every presentation that we give as strategic HR business partners needs to be tied to the business. Otherwise, again, you're just transactional. And so, and you can apply that methodology, the ideology, regardless of what it is. So again, talk about employee engagement. You can always tie that to, how do we achieve if the goal is 10% year-over-year growth? So we want to achieve 10% growth in 2024. Okay, you do it through people. So if you have a turnover issue in your product development team and you want to show the exit interview data, you say, okay, here's why you're losing your people. Well, why does that matter? HR, go fix it, right? We have the magic wand to fix all turnover issues. You say if this does not become a priority, then it'll be very difficult to achieve that 10% year-over-year growth, because the people who are creating your products are walking through the door before they can actually, we get an ROI on them being employees. And so you have to tie whatever it is you're presenting to the business, to business results, to business strategies. And you have to speak the language of business. We've all been in there early in our careers where we go in there and we talk to a big business development leader or an operational leader, and we start quoting FLSA guidelines and Department of Labor guidelines, and they don't really listen to that. But if you attribute what you're presenting to, remember in the board meeting, you said your goal is to achieve this objective. So here's how we're going to do it from a human capital perspective. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we're going to do this. And this will help you achieve it through people. That's how you become really a business partner. Being an HR business partner doesn't mean you go into a leader's office and start talking about labor laws. Yeah, you need to talk about that. Yeah, we need to enforce the guidelines and the laws. But at the end of the day, what makes you a powerful ally from a human capital perspective is to translate all this HR jargon and translate that to business results, and how the things that we're working on as an HR center of excellence will help you achieve that or even exceed those goals. If we just do a few things, and this is where we rely on the data to help prove that point.
I like to have the different trend lines. So, but I don't name them. I just say trend line 1, trend line 2, 3, and 4. So one of them may be revenue. The other one will be turnover. The other one will be profit per employee, whatever the metrics are. And I like to do it blind, because I just throw it up there and say, I'm starting to see some direct correlations between these different trend lines. So I get them to really kind of say, yes, that they agree that this trend line of revenue is going up as this one is going down. Then they always want to know, what is that? I said, well, the turnover is going down. I'm using your example, Lotus. The trend line 2 is turnover, and you can see it's directly proportional. As much as it goes down, the revenue goes up. It has a direct impact, because we assume that leaders are able to draw that correlation. But I would say 65 to 70% of the time they don't. They just think it's causing them a pain in the butt because they're having to restaff, or they're having to get people to cover a shift, or whatever it is. They're not making that direct correlation that there's a cost there. And there's two costs. One, there's a cost to revenue, a hit to revenue. But then there's also an additional expense that they're not counting into, the profitability, the EBITDA, the bottom line. So I think that's just something that I like to do, just kind of that blinded trend line, and then drawing the correlations for them on the second side.
I think there's a data point or several data points that a lot of companies forget to collect, which is the exit interview data. And this is both regrettable and unregrettable and really what that means to your company. And then the qualitative exit interview data. I see time and time again, companies are like, we don't know what we're doing, or we don't know why. And I said, well, have you done exit interviews? No, we haven't. And I said, well, and sometimes even when you have done exit interviews, there's not enough collection, really asking I've done several exit interviews. And what I found that, there was a list that I had of questions that I wanted to start with. And I thought, oh, that's too many questions, but I ended up doing it anyway and found that that the company was just blinded without asking these questions because they just didn't take the time to ask them. And when I presented the qualitative data and said, here are all of these things that we have not even checked for or learned about, and we need to do more exit interviews and make sure that we get people on. I mean, the other thing too is that it can be kind of political because at some point, the reasons why people sometimes leave is because of their leaders or the executive team. And so really advocating to ensure that that type of data is collected and it's an actual policy and part of the company's culture to do those things, I think is really, really important. And it's hard to do that sometimes. But just being able to, move forward and making sure that you're asking all the questions that you need to ask that you may not know about those answers, I think is really, really important stuff.
So a few panels back, we had this question in the comments. It all sounds amazing, but it feels like it comes from a place of having an HR function of multiple people within the team. And how about HR functions that are one person? So I made that part of my Hacking HR crusade to bring this lens of an HR function of one into all our conversations. For someone who is alone with their laptop, trying to make sense of all these, how would you recommend them to prioritize and focus in order to develop their communicating with data skills? Where to start? How to start?
I think having a great technology can help a lot. And by that, I mean being able to select and leverage a technology that, allows you to have good integrity with your data, be reliable, be real time, allow you to collect data on a quarterly basis if you need to, or if not, I recommend at least twice a year for engagement or whatever, is that you might need to do, like a side survey for something specific. That helps a lot because you're not spending time, doing like a Google worksheet and you're collecting a survey or redesigning it, and then being able to make sense of whatever the output is. Like, just get the right technology that allows you to speed up your process and remove your administration. And not only that, but I was just at the HR Tech Conference, and there's so much AI now built into those administrative capabilities that you're really saving a lot of time. Of course, you want to always be careful that any HR technology, especially with AI, you're not making decisions based on those things, based on the output, but it is the data point and data points that you can collect in a more efficient way to help you make decisions when you're in the room with stakeholders.
Thank you.
It's interesting. On my podcast, I was actually talking to a young lady that is a department of one. And God bless those men and women who are they're the only soul of, they're the only person that's kind of holding the line from an HR perspective. But my biggest advice would be, keep it grassroots. Because if you're a department of one, you're wearing 15 different hats. You're running payroll, you're running benefits, you're running all these other things. The last thing you want to do is create another process or another administrative burden that you had that's going to divide you even further. I would say, stick to the grassroots, stick to the basics. Look at turnover, look at attrition, look at time to fill with your positions. There's like 5 or 6 key metrics that, regardless of what industry you were in, I think Sherm had a really good list on that. It doesn't matter. That you can use those five mechanics. and then build off of that. Well, once you get a routine where you're kind of generating reports, if you're here in Oracle or SAP shop, a lot of times you can automate those reports to kick out on Monday morning. But you just want to make sure you want to take it slow. Don't go out there and say, not to say against what Felicia's saying, technology definitely can save you a lot of things. But if you're a department of one, that lets you know that they're not trying to invest in a whole lot of HR. Otherwise, you would have gotten some help. But if you can get that technology, look at how you can automate some of those spreadsheets. And again, take it slow. Make sure that it's things that your stakeholders want to see. Again, those 5 things we're talking about, and slowly build off of that once you build competency, because you don't have an HRIS team or an analytics team to kind of help you out with those things. The worst thing you can do is show something that took you all weekend to do, and your bosses love it, and now the expectation is that you keep it up. And now you've overpromised and eventually may underdeliver, and that could spell catastrophe for any business partner. But take it slow, focus on grassroots basics, and then just kind of take it from there and build off of that first level of success and base it off of what your stakeholders need.
Thank you so very much. So Lotus, Trent, some very value dense, I'm mindful of time, very, very dense advice for HR departments of one.
That's not fair. I was ladies first. All right, so I have a rule, one report to rule them all, and not necessarily report, one data repository. So if it's a huge worksheet where you're able to go in and dump in all the data and then build a very interactive dashboard on top of that, I use Google Data Studio. It has all the visualizations at the org level, and there's little drop downs where they can get down to a hiring manager or a cost unit, however they want to do it. I like to do that because then all I'm doing is updating the data on the back end. Everyone has access to it. It's in real time. Everyone knows that I update it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 12. So I'm not getting, hey, can you give me an update on the report? No, I can't. You can get it on Wednesday at 1 o'clock like everybody else does. So it kind of helps, to your earlier point of, hey, this is great. Can you do it all the time? Yeah, I can. I'm going to update this data. And then if they want to, because we all have that one manager that says, oh, this is great, but I also want a report where I can find out how many people have 6 pinky toes. Well, sir, I'm sorry. I'm not doing that. You also have to create some boundaries there as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I think I would say build the skill of doing an impact analysis. Make that a habit so that you understand how to prioritize the problems that you're trying to solve, and that's going to help you understand what data you need to solve those problems.
This is absolutely wonderful. Lotus, Felicia, Jisan, and Trent, it was absolutely wonderful. A joy and a privilege hosting you today. Many, many thanks to everybody in the audience, either now watching us or listening in live or later on for the recording. I hope that you will get a lot of benefit and inspiration from listening to this. Go back, recommend the recordings, watch the recordings, and also a big, big thank you to Enrique and to Barbara for making this happen. So thank you, and enjoy your journey through analytics and enjoy your journey to becoming a strategic HR business partner. Thank you so very much, everybody.
Thank you, Manala.
Take care.
Thank you.